Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Kelly sat behind the bar of a nightclub and involuntarily recalled the theory that human life was a series of black and white stripes. Couch psychologists often said that life is a zebra, and if a person is on a black stripe, one should not despair because there is a bright future ahead. Others recommended jokingly, of course, to stock up on white paint and correct the situation to your taste. But Kelly was not comforted by this advice, but irritated because no brightness in the series of troubles she did not see and did not foresee in the future. On the contrary, the problems fell on her head as if from the horn of plenty. I have a feeling that in my past life, I destroyed people and cute kittens in a cruel way. Complained to Kelly, Betty's best friend, for keeping her company that night. Why else would I be in such misery? After all, the only light that awaits me will be at the end of the tunnel. Betty, though she'd grown accustomed to her friend's dark humor over the past month, still twitched at such statements. The girl immediately grabbed Kelly by the arm and began to assure her that she should not think in such a way. Thoughts are material. Betty was angry, looking into her friend's eyes. You have to think good thoughts, positive thoughts, okay? For the universe to hear you, by the way, the universe is very sensitive to words, requests, and thoughts. It always responds to powerful energy charges. You have to follow your thoughts and words. Many things will come true. Betty was a girl obsessed with esotericism, horoscopes, mantras, and affirmations. She chose guys according to her zodiac sign and started the day at the mirror, praising herself, so to speak, energizing herself for success. Kelly was her antipode. All her life, Kelly has been a pay girl, the pride of her parents and teachers. She graduated from school with a gold medal and got a budget place in advertising and public relations. She graduated, of course, with a red diploma. After graduation, Kelly married Jacob, whom she met in her first year of university. Immediately after the wedding, she found a job in her major. For 3 years after graduation, Kelly held the position of chief editor at an image agency. The experience was interesting, extremely diverse. Among the customers in the agency were large medical centers and car services and shopping centers. She mainly wrote texts for corporate newspapers and magazines, the purpose of which was to raise the company's image to unprecedented heights. She communicated with the owners of various companies and customers, went to meetings, conferences, events to cover them in a favorable light. In general, very organically blended into this world. Kelly loved her job. However, the pay was criminally low. Her boss weighed on the girl all the work, but the salary did not increase. She constantly convinced Kelly that they were critically short of money. However, managed to fly several times a year on vacation to prestigious resorts. Kelly, with her excellent student syndrome, swallowed her boss's explanations for a long time and patiently shook the noodles from her ears. So it lasted until last month. Then the girl accidentally saw on the site vacancy PR manager in a large agency, Mirage, and quickly responded to it. Mirage was a young, but suddenly grew advertising agency, which was always on the rumor. Then they participated in a sponsorship program, then in a charity event, then created new projects in the field of media and info business. Among the clients of the firm glimpsed famous brands, stars, and influential people of the country. Trying to get into the company was a brave decision, but who doesn't take risks will sit in a stuffy office while her boss warms his bones in the Seychelles. So the girl dialed the coveted number, and she was assigned the date of the interview, and at the right hour she was already at the coveted door. Our boss loves young and creative people, and always gives them a chance, even if they don't have much experience, but you have a lot of it. I'm sure he'll appreciate your candidacy. He's away right now and will be back in a month, but will reply by email. Kelly was informed by the hiring manager, Clara. True, he himself, demon incarnate, so be prepared for anything if you get hired. The pay is great, but the demands are high, and there is absolutely no tolerance in the chief. He hates tardiness, delayed projects, any excuses, yes, a lot of things he doesn't like. He's a very difficult man, although he's incredibly handsome. He just doesn't look at anyone. I don't know, maybe he's one of those guys. You know, the Blue Oyster Bar. The girl pouted her lips resentfully. It was obvious that she had already tried to make a move on the boss, but it didn't work out, and it hurt her very much. It should be given credit. The manager was extremely spectacular and shapely blonde. Her not modest cleavage showed everyone a wide sole of size 3, and plump lips glistened with pink gloss. So Kelly involuntarily thought that few men would pass by such a doll. However, neither the orientation of her boss nor the relationship with the team, the girl was not interested. She was attracted only by the work. And yes, the girl got it. A week later, the mysterious boss demon approved her candidacy. The girl waved goodbye to her boss with a handkerchief and flew away to a new place of work. They tried to keep her, even promised manna heavenly, but Kelly did not believe. To Kelly's amazement, she was welcomed at the Mirage with open arms. Surprised by her track record of projects and a pile of magazines that came out from under the pen of the girl, she liked the team. True, the boss was frightened, like naughty children, Babeka. Now and then you could hear giggling and wailing at the water cooler or in the ladies' room. When our Charles comes back, we'll see what you'll do. Although I know I'll be looking for a new job. He's not gonna leave anyone for the good looks. Kelly worked at the Mirage for almost a month. It seemed to her that a new stage in her life had begun, a beautiful and happy one. However, it was a trip to the doctor's office that turned everything upside down. Kelly just felt sick, but she was a paranoid person after losing both parents, so she immediately ran to the nearest private clinic. There she was given a disappointing diagnosis, and the doctor's verdict was like a thunderclap. Unfortunately, the diagnosis is rare, and the treatment is complex and difficult. However, I have no guarantee of recovery, he told the patient, but we'll do everything we can. I have a great doctor. Trust us. What if there's no treatment? Kelly asked then, looking only at the trash can that stood in the doctor's office, because she was afraid that she would get sick from such news, and she would spit out all her breakfast. The doctor was surprised by her question and shook his head. No treatment? He repeated with annoyance. Then I give you 6 months, a year. 6 months. Kelly echoed thoughtfully. However, Kelly, not being a jealous scandalizer, believed Jacob, who swore that there was nothing between him and Cindy. As it turned out, her naivete played tricks on her again. How long have you been friends with her? Kelly asked, looking at the mountain of wrinkled clothes that her husband had stuffed into his suitcase. Be honest, Jacob. For a while. The husband gritted his teeth. Kelly nodded and then went into the kitchen to make herself some tea. She waited until the front door closed behind her unfaithful spouse before throwing the still full cup against the wall. Then she looked at the light brown stain on the wallpaper, shifted her gaze to the shards of her favorite mug, and wept bitterly. Kelly sat down on the floor, wrapped her arms around her knees, and let her sobs fall. It seemed to her that her life had been shattered just like that cup, in one moment into many sharp shards, and if she clutched one in her hands, it would penetrate her skin and leave a wound. Kelly lived like that for another week. She took a sick day at work, even though she knew the risks, because she was on probation. However, she couldn't find the strength to take a shower, let alone smile at her coworkers or generate creative ideas. All this path led Kelly to the nightclub Platinum. To be more precise, Betty had dragged her there, having made her friend take a bath and put on makeup beforehand. She'd even picked out her outfit. The scarlet strapless dress looked expensive and spectacular on the brunette. Betty claimed that loud music, a good dose of booze, and a club atmosphere would bring Kelly to her senses. She was right. But it wasn't the strobe lights and music from the speakers that shook Kelly up. It was the man. The brunette sat down at the bar at around 1 o'clock in the morning and ordered a whiskey on the rocks from the bartender. He found himself sitting across from his girlfriends. Kelly cast a brief glance at him, unwittingly noticing that the stranger was incredibly handsome. Sharp cheekbones, dark, thick hair, tall with a fashionable haircut, dressed in a dark gray jacket, shirt, and jeans that didn't hide but only emphasized the difference between his broad shoulders and narrow waist. Betty noticed the young man as well. She immediately leaned closer to her friend. "Who let the cover guy in here? I'm willing to bet my favorite delusional purse, for the sake of buying one I haven't eaten in almost a month, that behind all those layers of clothing is hidden the perfect athletic triangle packed with all kinds of muscle." Hot on one exhale, whispered Betty to her friend. "God, the universe heard you, but instead of old Depp, it brought Apollo down from heaven, dressed in expensive clothes." Kelly snorted into her glass with laughter. She was drinking at that moment, and what caused the cocktail to spill back through the tube and gurgle in the glass? "Oh shit!" Still chuckling, Kelly wiped her lips, setting the glass aside. Oddly enough, it was this embarrassing episode that caught the stranger's eye. He barely raised his eyebrows and his lips twitched into a smile when he noticed the brunette. Kelly hurriedly turned away, continuing to chat with her friend about distracting topics. However, the man so caught the girl's eye that her thoughts kept returning to his person. After a while, Kelly couldn't stand it and furtively threw another glance at him. What she didn't expect to see was that the stranger was also looking in her direction. Noticing that their gazes had crossed, he gave the girl a charming smile. Kelly suddenly felt a wave of embarrassment. She was completely confused under the gaze of the light gray eyes. "Is he looking at you?" Betty asked, and then squealed in delight, answering her own question. "He's looking at you. Look, you've got to go up to him." "What?" Kelly asked, her eyes widening in fright. "Are you crazy? You're the one who's crazy if you're planning on blowing this chance." "The universe. If you say one more word about the universe, I'll put an end to our long friendship and die alone." Kelly grumbled. "Exactly. You got the verdict that you have nothing left to enjoy." The blonde fluttered her arms excitedly. "Were you having fun at all again? Did you do anything wild? Skydiving, maybe? Danced at a carnival? Hitchhiked to some country? No. So why don't you at least flirt with this handsome guy? What if you spend the night with him? A stranger?" Kelly marveled. "Yes," raised her voice. "Yeah, why not? What's stopping you? I remind you that your jerk Jacob left you in the most difficult period of life. He went to his, just a girlfriend." When she said that last sentence, her friend comically changed her voice to a man's and whispered, mimicking Jacob, "That's no reason to throw yourself at the first man you meet." Kelly grumbled, hiding a smile. "Well, I'm sorry, my favorite, but you don't have a lot of time to go over it. You know I wouldn't miss my chance. If he was looking at me, I'd have walked off into the sunset with him by now. So run off to meet your Johnny Depp. My friend insisted. I'm not going out to meet him, okay? I've never been to a club, but I've seen a lot of documentaries about it, parried the girl with knowledge. Kelly, Betty tried to stop her friend, and her eyes widened, which Kelly didn't notice. And none of them ended in a wedding, you know. Usually these personalities turn out to be maniacs. Put something in my glass now, and tomorrow you'll find my name in the criminal record, and I want to live the rest of my life, however short. Kelly, again the girl tried to interrupt her friend, pulling her by the arm. Stop it. Kelly, however, a little tipsy, continued her tirade. It's rude to stare at strangers, by the way. She muttered, shaking the contents of the glass with a pipe, which loosened her tongue and allowed her fantasy to play out, especially since he's insanely handsome. And you know what the problem is? He knows it. Guys like that are usually narcissistic, but empty. I bet he's the narcissist of legend, not Apollo. I can imagine us making love under the mirrored ceiling, and for 5 minutes he'd be staring at his reflection and the muscles in his back and arms rolling over and over. Oh my God! Betty groaned suddenly and choked with laughter, covering her flushed face with her hands. Kelly looked at her friend in surprise, not understanding her reaction. The joke was funny, but not to the point where her shoulders were shaking with internal laughter. She realized why her friend was having a nervous fit, however, when she heard a pleasant male voice behind her. I don't have a mirrored ceiling in my bedroom, but we could move the bed to the closet, so I could see my muscles better. I prefer gluteal muscles. I've been squatting with a barbell for a reason. Kelly was stunned, looking at her friend hiccuping with laughter. She didn't dare to turn at the voice. Meanwhile, laughter was clearly audible in the man's tone as he continued to respond to the accusations thrown at him. I swear I'm well-mannered enough not to look at people. It's just that right behind you was a bar mirror looking at myself, you know. Betty, unable to stand it, laughed. Kelly, on the other hand, blushed thickly to the tips of her ears. Stop mocking me, please. You see, I'm so ashamed. The girl mumbled. I really apologize. I'll forgive you if you let me buy you a drink and prove that I'm not a bad guy. So to speak, to debunk your stereotypes. You know, after your accusatory speech, it's already a matter of honor. The brunette replied. Kelly found the strength to turn around and look at the stranger. He was even more handsome up close. A clear lip line, a high, intelligent forehead, correct, masculine features. Wow, what time is it? Wow, it's late. Betty marveled out loud, staring at her empty wrist where there was no watch in sight. It's about time good girls like me went to bed. So you can take my place. Young man, I don't mind. Her name is Kelly. She likes sweet cocktails, and by the way, she's not usually this bad. It's just been a bad day. Betty slid off the high bar stool, making way for the brunette. She hung her purse on her shoulder and tried to get away, waving goodbye. What the hell are you doing? Kelly hissed, grabbing her friend's arm, holding her in place. I'm messing with your love life, but I don't know him at all. That's what dating is all about. Betty snapped back. Two strangers meet and get to know each other. Honestly, Kelly, I hope he gets to know you deeply enough tonight. Laughed her girlfriend, making Kelly blush again, noticing her friend's hesitation. Betty gave her a hug and whispered, I'll hang out here for now. Don't worry. If anything, text me and I'll pick you up. Okay. I'm begging you, at least try to shake things up. Maybe this person will just help you get your mind off. You know. Pulling away, the girl pecked her friend on the cheek, leaving a sticky lipstick trail. With one more glance at the brunette, Betty disappeared into the crowd of dancing people. Kelly let out a long sigh as she looked at the blonde, but then turned back to her new companion. "So, Kelly," the man smiled softly, "I swear I'm not a maniac. You know, any self-respecting maniac would say the same thing." Kelly parried, still feeling very uncomfortable after her embarrassment. "Fair enough," nodded the man. Kelly felt tense at first. After all, she had recently been abandoned by the husband she had loved all her conscious life. He'd left her meanly, so she didn't want to trust men. But whether it was the cocktails or the charming brunette was such a great conversationalist, she relaxed very quickly. Soon Kelly was laughing at his jokes. Moreover, his smiles and laughter made her cheekbones droop, and her abs began to ache. She was sure that another hour, and she would leave the club with relief cubes. It turned out that the young people were on the same wavelength. They easily found common topics, had many similar interests, both in the professional sphere and in their personal lives. The man a couple of times invited Kelly to dance, both slow and fast. The girl was simply delighted, because her new acquaintance turned out to be a great dancer and skillfully led her. Her body literally followed the man's movements. They moved in a single rhythm as if they were practicing. An hour and a half later, when Kelly received a text message from her friend that she would like to go home, the girl realized that she did not want to leave the club. She liked the company of a stranger. She texted Betty that she would stay a little longer. In response, she received a lot of smiley faces, in the form of salutes and a couple more. She was too embarrassed to recognize the meaning of them. At this time, a couple more drinks appeared on the bar, generously portioned, refreshing ice. To introductions, the man said, tapping his glass against Kelly's. "Wait, what's your name?" Kelly asked, before she had a chance to sip her drink. At this question, she even stirred. The rest of her consciousness, which seemed to drift on the waves of alcohol and euphoria of acquaintance, was horrified. She'd been talking to a man for an hour already. One could say she'd fallen in love with him, and she hadn't even bothered to learn his name. "Charles." The man introduced himself with a smile, stirring the ice in his glass and making it clink against the glass walls. "Oh, that's my boss's name, Charles, but at work they call him." She lowered her voice to a whisper and put her palm to her mouth, as if she didn't want to share such confidential information with the rest of the club. "You know the rhyme." The girl pulled away, laughed, but then blinked fearfully, realizing that she had just insulted a man. "Oh, you're not offended, are you?" "It's not about the name. It's about the person who bears it." She justified herself. "I think my boss is called that on merit. They say that he is wildly harmful, rarely appears in the office, because he is always traveling, but always finds someone to fire. Can you imagine?" "I only worked there for a little while, but I've already heard horror stories, and the girls call him that because they're offended, because he doesn't pay attention to them. You know, I'm a mean boss too." Charles grinned. "I don't like, for example, the laziness of my subordinates or lying. I don't like unwillingness to admit their mistakes and improve, unwillingness to take responsibility. I can't stand inappropriate criticism of other people's work, coupled with a lack of alternative ideas. Well, not many people like that." Kelly nodded approvingly. At that moment, a guy appeared behind her, eager to order from the bartender. He squeezed in next to Kelly and shoved her in the back. This caused the girl to lurch forward, falling into Charles' arms. "Oh!" she exhaled. Finding herself in a tight embrace, she smelled the brunette's perfume, tart with notes of wood. "Oh, sorry." The guy apologized. "It's okay." The girl smiled awkwardly, nodding at him and pulling away from Charles. Her hand remained in his palm, though. She didn't want to take it away, and the man was in no hurry to open his fingers. Instead, Charles looked into her eyes. His fingers gently stroked the back of Kelly's hand. She wanted to ask Charles something else, like what company he was an executive at, or at least what perfume he wore, or did Charles know that his gray eyes were like morning mist and silver? Just all thoughts flashed out of her mind. Kelly remembered again how boring her life had been, so the girl took a breath as if she meant to dive into the icy water, and then leaned forward, touching her lips to the man's. He froze for a moment, not expecting it, but then responded to the kiss. Sparks raced through Kelly's body, and lava seemed to flow through her veins instead of blood. Butterflies erupted in the girl's stomach that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Charles's lips swallowed a quiet moan that Kelly hadn't expected from herself. She hadn't expected to kiss a man in a nightclub, in front of the others. As if mindful of the audience, she broke the kiss, whispering directly into Charles' lips, "Can we get out of here?" The man's eyes darkened and his breathing hitched. The chemical reaction that happened between them subdued both of them. He nodded, unable to answer, taking Kelly's hand. Charles helped her down from the chair. Forgetting their drinks, they walked out of the club. Kelly rubbed her eyes, but still didn't dare open them. Her whole body ached and her head felt heavy. "Good morning," she heard a man's voice. At that moment, she sharply remembered where and with whom she was. She opened her eyes and saw a man beside her. "Good morning," she mumbled back, and blushing, she coughed. Charles smiled, pulling the naked girl to him. She snuggled against his chest, a pleasant sensation of warmth and closeness spreading through her body. The night had been an extravaganza. Kelly, a little tipsy, didn't remember everything, but what she did remember made her blood boil anew. Kelly laughed into Charles' neck, thinking that she had something to brag about to Betty, and her girlfriend was probably hungry for details. "Not disappointed?" Charles asked suddenly. "Disappointed in what?" Kelly looked up. "Well, there are no mirrors here." The man reminded her slyly, looking at the brunette. She snorted and pinched his side weakly. "But you have a panoramic window. Maybe you like to be watched." She raised her eyebrows, nodding at the window. "I love it. Pigeons, seagulls, butterflies." He nodded. "I love it." Charles lived in a luxurious neighborhood in a 2-story apartment. His bedroom was large but Spartan, with a huge bed, closet, and bedside tables. The window was adorable, though, a full wall. Kelly thought it must be really nice out here in the rain. The sun was shining brightly in the sky now. The girl looked up at him and was startled. "What time is it?" she asked. "I have to go to work, but it's Sunday." "Think of another excuse to get away from me." The man smiled. "No, of course not. I don't have to work until tomorrow." Kelly explained, rolling off the bed and looking for her clothes. "But I have a project I need to finish right away. My boss, the evil one, is flying in tomorrow." "I told you. I don't want to be out of work so soon. I really like it. Besides, I took the whole week off, which he doesn't like either. I guess he doesn't like anything at all, except the tears of his employees." Grumbling at her boss, Kelly began to pack her things. She found her underwear, but she couldn't remember where she'd taken off her red dress. She only hoped it had been in the hallway and not in a cab. "I don't want to believe that your boss is that unpleasant," the man remarked. With his hands behind his back, he watched Kelly gather with amusement. The girl shrugged her thin shoulders, trying to finger her hair. "I can't draw conclusions until I've met him in person," she remarked reasonably. "However, rumors about this person do not dispose to pleasant communication. I'm afraid of him in advance, you know." Kelly said the name of the boss in a low voice, as if tasting it. "You don't know him, by the way?" She turned over her shoulder, catching the brunette almost choking on a restrained laugh. "I've heard of him." Charles nodded. He threw back the blanket and stood up smoothly, like a predator, approaching the girl. She looked at him suspiciously. "Did you hear that?" Kelly clarified. He nodded affirmatively again. "I'm well acquainted with him, Kelly, and now you are too. Why don't you draw your own conclusions?" It took Kelly a while for Charles' words to sink in. Then she gasped and recoiled. "No," the girl exclaimed, first pale and then blushing. "No. During the night you only said yes and yes. You turned to me a couple of times, Vlord." Charles remarked, "I like that better." Kelly swallowed and covered her breasts, though it was no use. "This is a nightmare," the girl whispered. "I slept with my boss, I'm fired." "That's usually how you get promoted, not fired." Charles remarked. It was obvious that the situation made him laugh, and Kelly's reaction was hilarious. Kelly herself was in shock. "It's not funny." She shook her head worriedly. "You're not kidding?" "Tell me you're kidding. I can show you my passport. And I wasn't hiding where I work. I thought you understood." Charles shrugged. Kelly took a deep breath, then exhaled. She'd been euphoric yesterday. Of course she hadn't realized that their jobs were so similar. How much had she told him about her co-workers and her boss? Kelly staggered toward the exit. "Now I really have to go. We can have breakfast, then I'd call a cab if you're in a hurry?" Charles began, no longer smiling but frowning. "Look, don't take everything so personally, okay? I liked you. I thought you liked me too. I'm not as much of a jerk as they say, seriously. I'm just strict, and I take my job seriously, because I started this company myself from scratch. I hate the fact that some people treat my life's work with the sleeves up. It's a shame if they see it as some kind of aggression." Kelly didn't hear his words anymore. She nodded strangely, and then turned on her heels and hurried downstairs. She found the dress next to the stairs. "Kelly, wait!" The man tried to stop her. Only the girl did not want to wait. She hastily pulled on the dress, grabbed her shoes, and jumped out of the apartment barefoot. She was ashamed, wildly ashamed. She devoted the rest of the weekend to remembering what she had talked to Charles about. She realized with horror that she had been too frank. On Monday, Kelly came to work with her head down low. She hadn't done the project, but she'd brought a letter of resignation. "Why are you looking so glum, Kelly?" asked her coworker Mason. "Have you seen your boss yet? Did he show up?" She looked up. "Yeah, the first one. He's sitting in his office, pissed off. I haven't seen him that grumpy in a long time, and neither have you." Kelly swallowed nervously, tucking her dark curls behind her ears. She sighed resolutely and walked toward Charles' office. Knocking and hearing come in, she stepped inside. Charles sat in the supervisor's chair, in a halo of morning light. Kelly slid her gaze over the man, ignoring the butterflies in her stomach. "Charles," Kelly muttered. "Hello. I brought this. Anyway here." The girl put a resignation letter on the boss's desk. "What's this?" He looked at the paper with an unpleasant gaze. "A letter of resignation. I can't work." "What are you, a child, Kelly?" Charles bristled. "Do you want me to tear it up, or do you want it out of my sight?" Kelly opened her mouth and glared at her boss. "You're not letting me quit. Is there a reason?" He raised his eyebrows. "Besides the fact that I've seen you naked?" "Well, you know." Kelly hissed, suddenly forgetting that she was shy. Charles, on the other hand, suddenly smiled, and his gaze grew warmer. "I like you better with that look on your face." Approvingly, he nodded, before taking the application and crumpling it up and tossing it into the recycling garbage can. Kelly nodded, but then her shoulders slumped again. "Look, this was a mistake. I can't work with you. And I'm not sure I want to spend time working right now," she said. "What do you mean?" The girl looked into the gray, attentive eyes and decided to give him the whole truth. She realized that after that he would turn away from her, though maybe he would give her a bonus out of pity. "I don't have much time left, is what I mean," Kelly declared. Then she just spilled her guts about the doctor's appointment, about her decision, about her husband running away. "You see, Charles, I'm not like that. I don't throw myself into bed with strangers, honestly. It's just that you caught me at a difficult moment." She tried to explain herself, sitting across from her boss. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you right away, but talking about the fact that I have only a few days left somehow spoils the romance. And I just wanted to relax, exhale, forget about who I was, what was happening to me. Honestly, at least for a short time, but I succeeded. I guess that's why the news that you, my boss, knocked me off my feet. It was just fate laughing at me, constantly tripping me up. I wanted to do something that was out of character for me. And what did it lead to? Even the man I liked so much, to whom I opened up, turned out to be a boss. That's nonsense." Kelly shook her head, as if marveling at her own words. She didn't even think about what she was saying, just used Charles's silence as a shoulder to cry on. He listened attentively, not interrupting her, and looked at her intently, as if he were looking into her soul. When Kelly was silent, he asked softly, "So you really liked me, didn't you?" The girl flared up. "That's not what I meant." "Stop! What are you talking about? I told you I was dying and going through a divorce, and that's all you heard? You're a narcissist after all." She snorted with a touch of irony. Charles smiled. "I just heard that the girl I liked me at first sight. And from there on, it's all a blur," he reported, causing Kelly to stare at his fingernails in embarrassment. "I don't understand. Are you kidding?" Or the girl even squinted her eyes, gazing into the man's face. She remembered very well how her husband, with whom she had lived together for so many years, had run away with his heels blazing. Then why was this man, let's be honest, a complete stranger to her, as calm as a Chinese god? Then Kelly thought that was the answer to her question. She's nothing to him, so he has no worries. For some reason, this thought pricked the girl in the area of the heart, a sharp and thin needle. It became unpleasant. Charles, unaware of the thoughts of the brunette sitting across from him, hurried to explain himself to her. "Kelly, it will take me a while to digest all the information that you just poured on my head," honestly admitted the boss. "However, I want to say once again that none of what you've said has convinced me to sign my resignation letter or to forget that I had a good time with you. And anyway, didn't you say you wanted to try something different for yourself, get out of your comfort zone, tickle your nerves? How about an office romance with the boss?" Charles winked cheerfully at her. Kelly smiled shyly, shaking her head. She slowly, as if reluctantly, took her eyes off the man's handsome face. She looked around the office she was in for the first time. On one of the gray brick walls hung several busy and bright vintage posters with retro advertisements. In another corner was a shelf with a vinyl record player. The girl remembered that Charles liked retro. He loved history and was very fond of traveling. She thought she would like to get to know him better, but she also thought that it was as if she knew him. It was like meeting old and close friends, people who were close to one another, 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 people who were close to one another. Charles turned out to be the same. These reflections both comforted and saddened the girl. She did not want to think about the future, to connect her life with new relationships and feelings, because she already knew that a happy ending in her story is not provided. I'll give you a penny for your thoughts. Charles broke the silence, using the old British ideology. The girl looked at him sincerely and openly. I wouldn't want to be in a relationship. At the nightclub, I thought I'd run away from you in the morning like Cinderella from her prince. She confessed. That would be my daring adventure, a flash of passion with a stranger, like in the movies. And revenge on my ex-husband, I guess. It's nice to hear that I've been made into an instrument of revenge. Charles grumbled. His eyes, however, shone with slyness. Well then, I offer you friendship. How would you like that? The girl bit her lip for a brief moment, but then nodded hesitantly. I'd like a friend like you. Well, that's settled. Charles clapped his hands together. We're best friends from now on. Oh, don't say that, Betty, okay? Kelly laughed. My friend who was at the club last night will scratch your eyes out, but she won't give up her best friend status. Charles smiled softly at Kelly, looking into her face. The look in his gray eyes made butterflies flutter in her stomach again, tickling her delicate wings. She realized that being friends with this man was going to be a challenge. Then I'm going to work, she asked uncertainly. Charles nodded, then added in a pseudo-businesslike tone, I'm waiting for your design for the clothing brand, Mrs. Kelly. And don't forget that at 1 o'clock we have lunch at my favorite cafe. I'll pick you up, don't you mind? Kelly giggled, feeling like a girl, and shook her head. How can I say no to my scary and evil boss? The girl asked playfully, standing up from her seat. Charles, dissatisfied either with her answer or with his reputation. I'll take away your bonus. He lazily dropped the threat, returning to the papers he had been sitting on before she arrived. Kelly smiled broadly and walked out of the office. She leaned her back against the wooden door and covered her eyes, still smiling. There was a warmth and a strange anticipation in her soul, like in childhood, on the eve of the holidays, when a child falls asleep in nervous, but so pleasant excitement, expecting magic, gifts under the tree from Santa, or a birthday cake with candles that will surely fulfill all his wishes. Kelly hadn't experienced that pleasant feeling in a very long time. It had been gone from her life long before the doctor's diagnosis. She'd just gotten bogged down in routine, like travelers getting stuck in quicksand. Their relationship with Jacob had lost its spark a long time ago. The man did not try to please his wife. There were no surprises, no romance. All this seems to have remained in the first years of university, and then overgrown with everyday life. So now Kelly's blood began to boil again, and in her chest, as if flowers were blooming, the first spring flowers that broke through the icy soil. She seemed to think, for the first time, that everything would be all right. If only now, if only this second, but it would be. As the door closed behind Kelly, a smile slowly slid off Charles' face. He grudgingly set the papers aside, put his elbows on the desk, and rested his face in his palms, wiping away the fatigue that had built up. The insomnia of the last few days had taken its toll, and then there was Kelly. He didn't bother reminding the girl of what had happened between them the night before. No, not the bed scenes or the hot whispers. Those moments were fresh in her mind, but he realized she had forgotten other things. The fact was that just before she fell asleep, Kelly had suddenly sobbed in his arms. Small, fragile, naked, she had shared her innermost feelings with the man. The confession was much like her story in his office today, but much more confusing, emotional, and moving. That night she had told him about what her husband had done to her, what the doctors had sentenced her to, and that she didn't want to live on pills, but wanted to breathe until the last minute. He wiped her tears when the girl admitted that she had never been to the country she dreamed of. She said she'd dreamed of a cruise ship tour all her life. I wanted to see whales, dolphins, or at least someone in their natural habitat. I really love the sea and the oceans. And one summer I read a book called Silver Bay by Giorgio Moyers, said the girl, resting her head on Charles's chest. After that, I dreamed I'd see whales sometime later. It's not like I didn't know I didn't have time. That night, Charles never fell asleep. He stared at Kelly's face in the moonlight, tousled her soft hair spread over his pillow, and thought a lot, and came to the conclusion that he didn't want to let her go, even though it was an extremely difficult decision for him. He himself lost a loved one, a fiancée who never became his wife. The misfortune happened 3 years ago. However, he could not throw the girl out of his heart, so he was distracted by work, with such diligence and zeal that he earned the reputation of an angry boss among employees. Of course, he was unwilling to look at other ladies after losing his beloved. There had been only flings in his life, minor and brief, and now there was Kelly. So funny, sincere, insanely beautiful, a girl whose heart had been so unceremoniously broken. The Charles Agency was famous for its charity work. In the man has always lived a certain thirst to help people, which only became stronger after the loss of his fiancée. But his desire to help Kelly he could not call philanthropy. It was deeper. It was as if Kelly had fallen into his heart back then, in the nightclub. Her delicate fingers had touched the strings of his soul that had long been silent. They began to play a melody again, and his heart began to give it a special rhythm. Charles did not want to give up so easily. He felt like he wanted to be there, like it was the most right thing in the world, like he had been waiting for this meeting with Kelly. The man looked out the window, at the grayish sky with sparse clouds. One of them looked like a hare with long ears, and the rest were just cotton candy. He drummed his fingers on the table, trying to calm the excitement that hadn't let up in the last 24 hours. He realized he couldn't help the girl, but he wanted to try to make her life beautiful, the kind of life she dreamed of. Charles took his smartphone and, having found the necessary number in the directory, pressed the call button. "Adriana, hello," he began softly. "I'm interested in a cruise ship, and also, where in the world can you see whales?" The sky was gray and so low that it looked like it was about to fall into the waters surrounding the cruise ship. Kelly thought that the sky and the waters of the ocean reminded her of Charles's eyes. The man that had burst into her life suddenly at the most difficult moment and then simply turned her world upside down. He became the artist who had plenty of white paint to color her life. After that frank conversation, they really became friends. They talked a lot, went out a lot, went to movies and restaurants. Charles would invite her home and cook dinner himself. They talked about work and life, shared dreams and interests. Kelly began to look forward to each morning, just to see Charles, just to talk to him. She suddenly realized that every night when she went to sleep, she thought of Charles, and when she woke up, she thought of him. A month later, when Charles brought Kelly the cruise tickets, she was speechless. Of course, she thought it was crazy to take off to an unknown destination, to give up her life and her job. Betty, however, stated emphatically, "It would be crazy not to do it, Kelly. I will break our friendship if you refuse," she assured her friend. "You're going to regret it your whole life. And look at the way Charles is looking at you. I'd give my soul for just one look." We decided to remain friends. Kelly waved it off languidly and hesitantly, and Betty snorted, rolling her beautiful eyes up to the ceiling. "Yeah, right? There's always so much tension between friends that it's scary to put a match to it. God forbid it all blow up." "Yes, you are in love with each other, you fool," the girl declared in a categorical tone. "But I can't do that to him." Kelly reminded her. "He told me he lost his fiancée. Do you want him to lose another person?" The smile on Betty's face faded, but she quickly pulled herself together. "How about you don't decide for him what he should do?" the girl suggested, crossing her arms over her chest. Of course, very soon they realized that remaining friends was a lost cause. An affair broke out between the young people before they even stepped on the deck of the ship. Charles even had to arrange to switch cabins. Their staterooms were in the luxury category, but they were separated. Now the lovers were not satisfied with this arrangement. They wanted to travel together, live in the same cabin, sleep at night in a double bed, or not sleep. It was a wonderful trip. Kelly woke up in Charles' arms every day and jokingly asked him to pinch her to make sure she was awake. He did so with pleasure, lightly pinching his girlfriend's thigh or side. It didn't hurt, but it was very ticklish, which made Kelly giggle. Then the tickling would turn to kissing, making the girl float above the clouds. On one of the days of the cruise, their liner, with the romantic name Call of the Ocean, was sailing north of Coronation Island. That's when the real miracle happened. "Whales!" shouted one of those walking the deck at that moment. "There are whales in God. There are so many of them. There must be so many of them." The passengers, among whom there were even zoologists, spilled out onto the deck with their eyes wide open, looking out into the vast waters. All the way to the horizon, at night they lay in their cabin. Charles was already breathing evenly, falling into sleep, but Kelly couldn't sleep a wink. She replayed and replayed in her mind the moment she had met the whales when she had first seen them. Then she thought about her confession to her boss. The words had been on her tongue for a long time, but she didn't think it was fair to say them, as if they were some kind of burden, an obligation. But Betty was right. It wasn't her place to decide for Charles what to do with her feelings, whether to accept or reject them. He'd given her too much already, and even if their fairy tale on the beach had ended, she wouldn't blame him. However, he had reciprocated her feelings, and now Kelly didn't know what to do. "Charles, are you asleep?" she asked softly in the night, not expecting an answer. Charles, however, did respond. "It's up to you, Princess," he murmured sleepily, touching her hair with his lips. "A word from you and I'll be cheerful. Just give me 5 minutes and a cup of coffee." Kelly smiled. Charles really did treat her like a princess. Protecting her, trying to fulfill her wishes, she was living a fairy tale. "I was thinking." She bit her lip, hesitant to voice the thought. "I thought that when we got back, I would go to the doctor again. You know, it's strange, but I feel so good. Every day makes me happy, and I'm getting better. I just don't believe in my disease. If it's really killing me, I wish. There's just so much I haven't seen in this world yet, that." She exhaled convulsively, trying to deal with the huge lump lodged in her throat. Somehow it was so hard for her to say the phrase, "I want to live." Charles, however, heard her and understood. The man's arms wrapped around his lover tighter, pulling her to him. "I didn't want to bring it up, Kelly, because it should be your choice," he began gently. "But I'm thinking about it more and more. Let's try it together, okay? You're not alone. I'll be there for you, no matter what happens." Kelly was relieved. She believed Charles because she felt safe in his arms. Next to Charles, she could allow herself the bold and daring thought that everything would be all right. However, she had no idea what was waiting for her. a black car pulled into the parking lot next to a private clinic. Kelly looked up at the beautiful building, its windows reflecting the sunlight. The last time she'd gone to a private clinic, she'd gone to one in her neighborhood, but the building didn't look as luxurious. Charles, however, had insisted on the best doctor in town. "Well, I'm off," the girl said with deliberate cheerfulness and leaned forward to kiss the driver on the cheek goodbye. Charles accepted the kiss, but looked at her in surprise. "Where are you going?" "Alone?" "No, I'm going with you." The man's voice sounded almost indignant. Charles' whole look said he was annoyed at Kelly's assumption that he would let her go alone to take the blows of fate. "But they won't let you in the office anyway," she shrugged, "and you still have things to do today. Like there's anything more important than your health, Kelly. Let's go. If they won't let me in, I'll wait for you in the hallway. Then you and I will go and have lunch or go for a walk, okay?" Charles unbuckled his seatbelt, intending to get out of the car, but Kelly froze in her seat as she watched the man get out. She still couldn't get used to the care, the sensitivity that this beautiful man gave her. Involuntarily, she compared Charles and Jacob again. She remembered that when she had gone to the hospital that unfortunate time, Jacob had not even called her after the doctor's appointment, although he knew that the girl had a bad heredity and her poor health was troubling her. She remembered vividly walking out of the clinic and crouching alone through the city with rain drizzling from the sky. She remembered being devastated, but not finding the strength to call someone. Her phone was silent until Betty got off work and called her friend to check on her doctor's appointment. Jacob hadn't even called her since their breakup, just to see if she was still alive. Kelly only came to her senses when there was a knock on the window, and then the car door swung open and Charles gallantly offered her his hand, smiling. "Here you go, lady." She smiled back at him, and as she put her small palm into his hand, she felt a wave of relief. Her fear of going to the doctor was beginning to let her go, for she was not worried about anything around Charles, and she was ready for any news. However, what the young people heard after the doctor's examination shocked them. The man made an ultrasound, looked at the results of tests and studies, which the girl had taken earlier and brought with her, then looked at Kelly with a strange expression on his face. "Excuse me, but who told you that it is time for you to choose a wooden raincoat?" inquired the doctor. "May I know the name of the hero?" Kelly was confused by the question and the form in which it was asked. Yes, she'd heard of medical humor, had even been shocked by surgeons and pathologists' jokes a couple of times, but here she had an unpleasant feeling. Charles, who was allowed into the office, didn't like the question either. He sat in a nearby chair and moved forward, intending to ask the doctor to choose his own tone of voice. But Kelly squeezed his fingers just in time and blurted out, "A doctor from a private clinic," said the girl and wrinkled her forehead, remembering his last name. "Benjamin Braun, the clinic Healthy You. It is located on the outskirts." "Why?" The doctor hummed and shook his head, waving the papers. "So." He stretched out, not hiding his amusement. Everything became much clearer. Without explaining his behavior, the specialist typed something on the keyboard of his laptop, then turned it toward Kelly and Charles. "Here, look at your doctor," he offered, showing them an article from a local news portal. "Benjamin Braun, the con man who was arrested, is already serving his sentence. He took bribes, sold free medicines, and most often bribed people into useless treatments, scaring them with horrible fatal diagnoses. I'm surprised the news has gotten away from you, Kelly. We've had it on every channel recently, and every radio station has been talking about this bastard. But we were out of town. We went whale watching." The girl mumbled confusedly, and her eyes slid over the lines of the article, studying the details of the case. The picture was indeed of the very doctor Kelly had gone to see. The face of a man who promises you death in a year is extremely hard to forget. The doctor, at that time, when he heard that Kelly had gone whale watching, squinted suspiciously, as if wondering if she should see a therapist at the same time. Then he remembered how much her man had paid for a session to get them in as a matter of urgency, and decided that whales might well exist in the world of these people. Wait! Charles broke into the conversation, and his voice was extremely tense. What does all this mean for us? He lied to Kelly, am I right? It's she. Is she okay? It was only at that second that Kelly realized what the doctor was getting at. It was as if she had never imagined such an outcome and had never allowed anything like this into her head. Now she was frozen, the blood rushing to her face and her pulse pounding in her temples. She clutched her companion's hand again, so that her nails dug into his skin, leaving a trail of thin holes, but neither of them even noticed it. The doctor smiled. It was obvious how pleased he was to bring good news. He nodded happily. I'm not even going to ask you for a follow-up exam, Kelly, because you're perfectly healthy. Everything the previous doctor told you, though what kind of doctor is he, is an embarrassment to our profession. The man frowned for a moment and continued. In general, all his words and diagnosis were lies. He just hoped that you would become one of his victims, that he would get more money out of you. He had a pattern. He was in cahoots with other doctors. They were punished, too. They performed all the procedures in their clinic, and then said that with great labor and God's help, pulled the man from the other world. So his reputation was initially high. Fortunately, that story is over. It's a good thing you didn't agree to be treated by him. Kelly looked away from the doctor's face, staring at the laptop, then at the desk. She couldn't see anything else in front of her, though. Feelings stirred in her chest, jostling, one giving way to the other. Shock, amazement, joy, fear that this was another mistake, disbelief, but a strong desire to believe. I don't believe it. The girl shook her head. Charles lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, which brought her to her senses a little. The girl turned to him and noticed the sincere delight in his gray eyes. It was no longer fog, no longer an overcast sky with leaden clouds, but a gleam of silver that slipped the onyx of his glasses. It wasn't until she noticed the smile on the man's face, and the fact that there was a suspicious glint of tears in his eyes, that the girl realized it was all real. It was true, happening to her. I love you, said Charles, instead of all the other words of joy, in spite of the doctor's presence. And I love you, Kelly echoed, feeling tears running down her face again. She had been crying a lot lately, but only out of happiness. Looking into the face of the man she loved, Kelly inadvertently thought that her little failed death had been worth it to meet her true love. Charles proposed to Kelly almost as soon as they learned the happy news. It was at that moment that the girl realized she was still not divorced. Yes, she called Jacob her ex-husband, had not seen him for a year, but officially they were together. So the girl quickly filed the necessary divorce papers. Later, Betty joked that by doing so, the girl called her ex, as witches call demons at spiritualistic seances. Jacob first appeared on the doorstep of her apartment, but not finding the mistress there, he came to the office. He was surprised to see Kelly. The girl was not dying, as he thought. On the contrary, she had blossomed. Love and a wonderful vacation had helped her to become even more beautiful than she was. The girl's eyes shone, a natural blush played on her cheeks, which was much more beautiful than any cosmetics. She was beautiful and stylishly dressed. Kelly, Jacob muttered, looking at her in surprise. I got the divorce papers, came over to talk. Shouldn't have bothered, really. Kelly shook her head, not the least bit embarrassed by their meeting, for nothing even stirred in her soul. Everything can be done online now. Can you imagine how convenient that is? Jacob hesitated, stepping from foot to foot. He looked around the office where Kelly was working, then again, as if hypnotized, stared at the girl with greed. This letter of happiness was a surprise to me. He confessed. Really? Kelly raised her eyebrows. It was a surprise to me, and an unfortunate one, that we hadn't finalized the divorce sooner. Now we have to wait until it's legalized. I'm surprised you didn't think of that, you being in a new relationship and all. How did Cindy put up with you being married? Or does she only like other people's men? Kelly leaned back in her chair and flirted with her pen, glancing at Jacob, who looked a little shabby and pathetic at this point. Maybe he'd always been like that, though. Kelly just didn't notice the flaws in the people closest to him. She hadn't even noticed the mistress. Jacob grimaced and sat down in the chair across from Kelly. He picked up the statue Kelly had bought on the cruise when they'd stopped at the port, twirled it around, set it back down, only then confessed. Things aren't going so well with Cindy. My business is in trouble, you know. That's why I'm here. How are we going to divide the assets? It's just that I was hoping to get a mortgage on the apartment, and Kelly felt a rush of nausea as she realized the hidden meaning behind his words. Wait, Jacob. She stopped him, putting her hand palm forward as if signaling a stop. You mean you were waiting for me to stop treading ground and leave our apartment to you? Is that what you mean? Jacob shrank back at first, squared his head in his shoulders, then remembered that he was a man after all and straightened up. Don't you think that makes sense, Kelly? Tell me about your plans, suddenly the girl asked, leaning forward and resting her chin on her crossed fingers. I'm very curious. Are you planning to sell the apartment and invest in business, or live in it with your secretary, who is only your girlfriend? That's not funny. Jacob got angry, raising his voice. You have no idea what I'm going through right now. I invested in the wrong business, you know. I listened to that fool, hoping to make a profit. Now I got a lot of debt and a big problem with the IRS, and if I don't pay it off, they might even put a case on me. Cindy, on the other hand, she ran off with some asshole, barely had the IRS knocking on our door with charges. I'm just in some kind of hole. Do you realize how hard this is for me? Kelly's face didn't change. The accusation and exclamation of her ex-husband didn't hurt her. She was even surprised at her reaction. It turned out that Charles had taken up all the space in her heart and soul, taking her ex-husband out of it, along with his belongings. There was not even a drop of feeling for Jacob left there. She had no sympathy either, but Betty would probably say that the man was just caught up in karma. Kelly sighed, settling back into her original position. I see. Anyway, I wish you wouldn't take too long to sign our divorce papers. This play has gone on long enough as it is. You'll get half of the assets. By the way, as I recall, a business created during the marriage is also split in half. True, I do not need your debts, so you take your own company. Consider it a gesture of my goodwill. In a businesslike tone, said the girl, as if making a deal with a client. However, the apartment was inherited from my parents. It's not a jointly acquired property, so don't get your hopes up. Okay, why don't you just handle things on your own sometime? I've been dragging you along for too long already. Jacob shook his head and stepped forward. Are you serious, Kelly? Tell me, why do you want this apartment? You have no one but me. We've been through so much together. Well, do you want to? His gaze ran down her face nervously and quickly. Do you want me to come back to you? I'd nurse you. I'd carry you. You know, it was with Cindy that I realized how much I loved you. I made a mistake. This time the feeling of nausea in Kelly's throat became even more distinct. Her eyes narrowed, her gaze became stern. Unfortunately, I have some bad news for you, Jacob. The girl retorted sharply, I will live. I don't know how long, maybe a year, maybe 10 years, or maybe I'll live to be 100 years old. What? Jacob got sick, but you said. Kelly jerked her shoulder with an irritated frown. The doctor was a con artist. It's a long story, and I don't want to retell it. But wait, then we can have it all back, right? Jacob suddenly perked up. You and me together, just like old times. You always found a way to solve every problem, Kelly. I really appreciated that. This is going to be problematic. Kelly shook her head. My fiancé will be against it. You're what? Jacob jerked back as if he'd been spit in the face. Kelly turned the picture frame toward him. There, in a brightly colored picture, were Charles and Kelly. They were standing on the forward deck of a cruise ship. In the distance, the ocean was silver, and there were whales. That's why I'm asking you to hurry up. Kelly explained calmly, we want to get married. To be honest, I'd forgotten I was still married. I only remembered when Charles proposed. Wait, are you kidding? Jacob shook his head. Are you kidding me? And where was this photo taken anyway? And where did you find this one, Charles? Isn't that the name of your new boss? Kelly smiled broadly, nodding. It's nice that you remember something from my stories. Yes, that's him, Charles. I found him, as you say, off duty, but that's another long story, not for your ears. Jacob's face turned red, the color of a boiled tomato. You're having an affair with the boss? He jumped to his feet. Kelly suddenly laughed out loud. Is this coming from the man who left me for his secretary? She asked in a tone as if she could not believe that Jacob had brought up such a topic. You just tricked me. Jacob shouted even louder. You said you were sick, that you only had a year. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Jacob. The girl splashed her hands. I didn't do it on purpose. Jacob was shaken by the news. He looked then at the photos of happy couples in love, in brightly colored life jackets, then at the same satisfied face of his wife, with whom he had not yet had time to divorce. She was too beautiful at that moment, and Kelly had a kind of strength and self-confidence that he had never noticed before. It all made him angry and infuriated him. Kelly continued as if nothing had happened, glancing at her watch. Look, you come to my work, taking up my time with useless talk. The divorce will be in any case. If you want a scandal, then let's have one. I'm just not sure you can handle another lawsuit with the IRS on your ass. As to that apartment you wanted, I don't need it. I don't live there now. But you're not getting it, Jacob. I'm not a charity. Jacob gritted his teeth and moved forward, resting his palms on the PR manager's chair. Did you grow teeth this year? Or what? Become a bitch like your arrogant girlfriend? Kelly paused for a second, then got up from her seat as well. She looked arrogantly at the man she loved, it turned out, in a past life. I've always had sharp teeth. It's just that unlike you, I didn't sink them into the throats of the people closest to me. I fought on their side. I was always on your side, Jacob. You didn't appreciate my loyalty. You turned your back on me at a terrible time, ran away, tail between your legs, jumped into the first bed you could find. So you just don't dare come back into my life now and make some kind of claim. You're pathetic and disgusting. Get out. Jacob jerked as if Kelly had slapped him in the face. His face was flaming and his head was throbbing. It felt like it was going to explode like a ripe watermelon. Without another word, Jacob turned around to leave. At that moment, the door opened and Charles, the head of the Mirage agency in a business suit, appeared on the threshold. He gave his fiancée's guest and employee a surprised look, but quickly recognized his face, though it was now twisted with anger. "Jacob, right?" the man asked, trying to hide the contempt he felt for the man. "I'm sorry, I won't shake hands. Personal prejudice. Are you here to sign the divorce papers?" Jacob gave Charles a quick, angry look. "The fiancé? Well, congratulations, happily ever after. But tell me, how does it feel to pick up another man's woman, so to speak, to finish the stump?" He asked mockingly, with venom in his voice. "I have no idea." Charles replied calmly, "I've never had affairs with other people's women. When I met Kelly, she was single. They say some asshole dumped her when he found out she was sick. There are such moral assholes, aren't there?" Charles winked at a pale Jacob. After a moment, however, the contrived cheerfulness and calmness faded from Charles's face. "Now I suggest you leave the room before my patience runs out. Believe me, I'm trying very hard not to throw you out." Jacob felt with his skin that the man was not joking. He silently backed away, sidestepped out of the office. Kelly walked over to her man, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't know he'd think of coming here," she said timidly. "What an unpleasant man, and how did you live with him?" "I'm itching to hit him," said Charles grudgingly. "Why don't we go after him?" "Don't get dirty." Kelly shook her head and snuggled up to the man. He kissed her forehead, hugging her around the waist. "I'm here, by the way." Got a reply from a jewelry brand. They want the full package. "You're a smart girl." He praised the employee. "I'm lucky to have you in every way. Good thing I threw away your resignation letter." Kelly smiled broadly at her future husband, whom she loved with all her heart and, moreover, knew it was mutual. Over the past year, she had realized something else important. After a while, it might turn out that the streak of life that seemed black was actually a runway. After all, Kelly had really taken off, and she wasn't going to stop for a minute in the great flow of happiness.
Subscribe and click the bell.
There was no way they were going to meet. There was no chance. Their lives were like planets orbiting far apart in different orbits. Alex, a law student who had nothing to do at an expensive fashionable resort, was brought here by illness. Last winter he was depressed, and it came out of the blue. Yes, he studied for days and nights, sitting at the textbooks. Yes, he was in practice, where he saw such scum of the earth that God forbid he should meet them on a narrow path. And then one day he ran out of energy all at once. He lay with his back turned to the wall and stupidly looked at the geometric patterns of the carpet. He didn't want to eat, study, or even live. His mother and father were terribly worried. Alex was their only late son, a fictionally gentle, intelligent people. They never pressured the boy. If he was forbidden something, he understood perfectly well why. And all that could be allowed to him, allowed to get a dog, to bring home friends with a sleepover, to go with the class on a camping trip. He never heard from his father and mother no. It was the same with his choice of profession. Alex's mom worked as a people's assessor for a while. They're called nodding fields because they never challenge a judge's opinion or decision. But Mom had a girlhood crush on the judge, an attractive blue-eyed woman of about 45 years old. Mom admired people who, despite a difficult life, retain optimism and a cheerful disposition. Judge Nancy had been divorced a long time ago and was raising a deaf-mute daughter. Her husband left just because of the birth of such a sick daughter. Also a member of their family was a huge Maine Coon cat. Once there was a newspaper with a program on TV, and the cat took this paper as a special kind of invitation, meaning you can come here. The program was removed a long time ago, but we couldn't eradicate the cat's bad habit. They never turned on the TV, Nancy Helen's daughter lived in a special boarding school. She came home on weekends. Her mother was not going to marry anymore and gave all her strength to her work. In the first place, because she sincerely loved her work, and in the second place, she saved most of her earnings. She wanted to take Lena abroad for treatment. Surgery plus rehabilitation. Every day Nancy had to judge people who stole something or didn't share something or beat up or even killed. Most of all, she did not like the cases concerning the division of property, when people who had previously considered themselves relatives and were going to live together for the whole century began to fight over some closet or gold jewelry, and attacked each other with such fury that the civil case right there in the courtroom and threatened to turn into criminal. One time Alex went to pick up his mom too early. He had to wait for her. A young man named Parker was on trial. He had just been released from the zone and returned to his mistress Betty and was just beginning, so to speak, to taste freedom. In the evening they quarreled and Parker stabbed Betty. The ambulance came. Betty was drunk and didn't want to go to the hospital. They could barely convince her to get stitches. She wanted to stay with her example, who didn't understand why he'd taken up the knife. In the courtroom, they told each other they loved each other. "Betty, I'm sorry, there's no one I care about more. Parker told you. I'm going to sit down again, aren't you? I'll be waiting for you." Betty pressed his hands to his chest. This was a side of life Alex didn't know, had never encountered. Parker got 2 years and 10 months. And Betty was in the hallway excitedly discussing with her sister what to send him in first gear. Nancy felt sorry for him, Mom said as she and Alex drove home. She gave him the shortest sentence possible. He had already been convicted once, but his girlfriend was almost on her knees, assuring him that she held no grudge against him. Alex seemed to be thinking about something of his own. But isn't that when he started reading different literature? Not like before. If before he was interested in adventures, now they were replaced by detectives, books about the elusive, criminals, bloody maniacs, their kidnapper, and domestic violence. In Alex's senior year of high school, he told his parents he wanted to become an investigator. Mom was scared. "It's dangerous. Can't you choose some more peaceful profession?" Dad objected. "Alex is not likely to go into a dangerous line of work. I think he'll work in our small town, and soon all romance will be dispelled. He'll have to investigate a case like the one where a homeless man broke into an apartment and stole a laptop to drink it away. So I'd like to know, wouldn't a chore like this turn him away from the legal profession?" Alex wasn't in the mood to open up. So he briefly said, "We'll just have to wait and see." And during the years of study, he really had to see a lot of things that were too cruel, rough, ruthless. Practice was coming to an end, and again lectures were replaced by seminars. And at home he had to study reports, prepare term papers, and then look at the subject of his diploma. I studied every day until late at night. And finally, from the accumulated fatigue, and there was that very nervous breakdown. He became depressed. Parents were worried God knows where the money came from and bought him a trip to an expensive sanatorium by the sea. Alex didn't even want to go. What difference, where he will lie for hours in a fetal position in a city apartment on the 8th floor or in a local room, 100 meters from the sea. But suddenly the change of place did him good. In the sanatorium, the doctor began to treat him the old-fashioned way. He did not prescribe expensive procedures for the young man. Different spa healing climates, sea bathing, long walks, and drinks with soothing concoctions that were given at the bar had to do the trick. And after a few days, Alex felt that the air here was really healing, and he began to fall asleep easily in the evening. Sleeping soundly at night, he stopped having nightmares, and early in the morning he was greeted by the sea, clear as a tear, which washed away all the negativity and got rid of heavy thoughts for breakfast. Alex came with a wolfish appetite from metal, even milk porridge, which he did not like before. At the table, his neighbors were a father with a small daughter and a middle-aged woman. The little girl had a pretty face. Her hair was twisted into 2 thick pigtails. She chattered amusingly, and somehow it so happened that if the little girl was given peaches or cakes, everyone at the table was happy to give them to the little girl. Her daddy, Benjamin, smiled embarrassed and grateful. The middle-aged woman's name was Helen. She was unusually silent. It was clear that she was a wealthy woman. What was the jewelry alone? In the ring and hid a large diamond earrings with the same gemstones attracted admiring glances. Helen's short-cropped hair was kept small, which she dressed simply, but not a single thing looked cheap. And also the open things that women in the South love so much. Helen wore no loincloths, shorts, short skirts, over t-shirts. She always threw on a long-sleeved shirt or jacket. Helen probably did this then to hide her painful thinness. She seemed not just slim, but truly emaciated. Alex thought she must be on some fancy diet. Sometimes Helen sat down at the table, drank only a glass of tea, and left immediately. Sometimes, without any appetite, she would pick at the second course with a spoon and leave the plate. It was still rare when I managed to meet her gaze. If the neighbors at the table were talking to her, Helen answered, looking somewhere past, and her answers were always complicated and her voice quiet, as if she was afraid to say an extra word. Alex never met her either on the beach or on excursions, and they were organized almost every day in the sanatorium. You could see Helen only on the farthest paths, and that's not immediately noticeable, sitting on a bench somewhere, face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, enjoying the solitude. Alex didn't really care. He was glad that he was starting to come to life himself. There was an interest in life. For the first time in many months, he began to make some plans. Periodically, all vacationers in the sanatorium had to visit the doctor to check how the treatment was going. What was the result? Alex waited for his turn. Sitting in the corridor at the doctor was Helen. The door was slightly open, and Alex heard her voice characteristic, slightly stated, "To great regret, we were not able to help you. Isn't that right?" Sebastian asked the woman softly. "Well, probably, if I hadn't come to you, I would have been worse off." Helen tried to answer delicately. "You haven't put on weight." "Not a bit." "Blood pressure's still spiking," Sebastian listed. "And the psychologist says your anxiety level hasn't gotten any lower." "That's right." Silence. Alex imagined Helen nodded. "That's right," Sebastian summarized. "Until it's removed. The root cause you won't recover. I would recommend that you see a psychiatrist when you arrive. Apparently chemistry should already be involved here. Have him find some medication." No, Alex has never heard Helen speak so loudly and with so much excitement. "It's impossible for me. Even then, I proved with great difficulty that I'm not mentally ill." That's the only reason he got jail time. After all, he presented the case so that I made up everything with an unstable person psycho and make hysterics. Jealous of everything and everyone. Plus a vivid imagination. And it's a done deal. But you didn't do the beating yourself. Sebastian was still talking softly. "It's still a basic fact. Didn't I tell you? He somehow convinced my friends, ex-girlfriends, to testify that I've been weird since I was young, that I can cut myself and stuff like that." Okay, apparently the doctor preferred not to go into all that. There was silence. Sebastian must have been writing. "Get it at the nearest drugstore. These are sleeping pills. They're a prescription drug. And for the last few days you'll be here, get some sleep, and don't think about anything. I strongly advise you to go home. Let not psychiatrist, let psychotherapist, let psychotherapist. No one will put you on the register. But as you do not realize, you will not be able to live fully, will not be able to enjoy life, if you do not work on this problem. How much life is left in there, doctor?" Helen abruptly pushed back her chair. A couple of moments later, the door opened, and without looking at Alex, the woman walked quickly down the corridor. For some reason, all day long the young man couldn't forget about this conversation. He waited for dinner to see Helen in the dining room. Usually she was always a little late. They served very pretty cakes for dessert, baskets with cream and fruit. Alex automatically handed his to Ninotchka, while he looked out the door every now and then. But Helen never appeared. The next day Alex, as usual, went to the beach. Early in the morning he liked those hours, when there was still no one here. But who among the vacationers would really think of getting up at 5? Only a few fishermen could be found on the shore. But suddenly he saw Helen. The woman was sitting on a chaise lounge under the awning, although the sun had just descended. But one could see Helen. But you could see Helen. and here wanted to remain as inconspicuous as possible. She was wearing a denim fiber skirt, long to her heels, and some kind of stretchy sweater that Helen was tangled in. She sat with her arms around her knees and stared in front of her. Alex didn't want to disturb her and was about to discreetly retreat, but then she looked at him. They nodded to each other. "Good morning, can't sleep," he said. Because he had to say something. "As it turns out, even the pills don't work for me." Helen grinned. Alex didn't expect her to answer. She hadn't told anything about herself until now. "And I was tired of studying," he said. "Have a seat on the next slogan. Once I decided to give myself a break. That made it easier. Maybe you should also not think about unpleasant things." As Helen looked him straight in the eyes. "Can you do that? Teach me. How do I do that?" Suddenly tears came to her eyes. Helen bit her lip and stared at the sea. He could think of nothing but the trivial. But there are no unsolvable problems in the world. "Only if someone died, I died," Helen said. "Isn't it obvious?" Helen grew up with a stepmother, and once wanted more than anything to have her own home and her own family. Though everyone around her admired her father, her stepmother, and all three of Helen's children, and her two free, younger brothers. Her father was a scientist, a university lecturer, soft in family life, and a professor who was passionate about science to the point of madness. He forgot about food and sleep. If it was about his favorite science, his first wife died a few days after the birth of Helen. On the face of it was not so rare reason, a medical oversight. Later, someone changed all the records. I didn't punish anyone for that story. No one was suspended. And the grief-stricken professor never tried to get justice. Perhaps he wanted to raise his daughter on his own and never marry again. But after a few years, he met a young woman, whom he sincerely admired, as he did. Maria was in love with science, which means that she lived a spiritual life in words, and everything material was of secondary importance to her. The professor very quickly proposed to her, and Maria was not afraid to marry a man with a child. 2 years later, she gave birth to twins and decided that she had had enough of children, although the professor had hired her an assistant from the beginning. Still, the small children demanded too much attention. The housekeeper took over the household, cooking, washing, cleaning. But her mother didn't trust her to raise the boys. Maria wanted to raise her sons in her own image. Spiritual came first. One couldn't put too much value on things. Not even the fact that the couple's child saw toys as living things. No discount was made. A few times a year, the mother would pack plush animals, cars, and the like into a large cardboard box and give it to a woman she knew. A poor woman with many children. And God forbid that the boys would regret something, of course. In exchange for the given toys were bought new dressed boys were also not worse than their peers. But since they were little, they knew not to dream about things. Fashionable backpack or in one ship, which itself will swim in the bathtub, grinds the water with a propeller. But about this or that book, or that recovered father, who had a heart condition, you can dream quite well. With the boys, this issue passed. They obeyed their mother, at least for the time being. But Maria, from the very beginning, tried to apply this method of upbringing and stepdaughter. However, she was disappointed. Helen did not accept the punishments. She cried. One time, she even had a nervous attack. Her father promised Helen for her birthday the same lush princess dress that the girl's friends had. Most likely, the professor didn't understand what it was all about at all. But he had the pleasure of going with Helen to the store and pleasing her with a grade. Helen was so excited about the gift, made on the eve of her birthday, that she put on the dress, not wanting to take it off. When she was nevertheless persuaded to change into a nightgown before going to bed, her stepmother took the dress and hung it up in the closet in the room, saying she would allow the outfit to be worn on holidays. Helen, from whose hands the coveted article had been snatched, burst into tears so that her hands began to tremble. And the next day she had a fever. And instead of a holiday with a cake and candles and balloons, instead of fun with her friends, Helen lay in bed in semi-oblivion. Then the father and stepmother had a long talk behind closed doors, and the stepmother backed off from raising her stepdaughter. She forbade Helen practically nothing else. The girl simply ceased to exist for her. If Helen addressed her with any question, Maria answered to ask her father. The professor was so busy, so far from real life, that very soon the girl had to become independent. Sometimes she asked her father about her own mother. Tears invariably came to the professor's eyes. Katya was so sweet, cheerful, with an easy character, that with her death all joy left the house. Apparently, Helen had taken after her mother in many ways. She tried to arrange for two factions to form in the house. After all, Maria has sons. The girl reasoned, so let her be with Benjamin and Tony, the three of them, and they will not be bored. And Daddy's mine. Otherwise, it's not fair. They're together, and I'm alone. But the stepmother was quick to put an end to her daughter's claim to her father's attention. She believed that no one can be closer to her husband than herself. They work together, they have common interests. And Helen is growing up. And soon she will have her own life and her own spouse. Thus, the girl's relatives were replaced by her friends. She often stayed with them for days at a time. Her friends' parents didn't mind. No matter what, Helen was well, raised in a friendly manner, always tried to help with the housework. Sometimes someone would say, "I wish I had a daughter like that." Helen would only flinch. Apparently, deep down, it was weighing on her. The fact that, unlike her peers, she did not have a normal family, and she really wanted to have one. No one came to Helen's graduation. The professor was very busy. There was some important meeting of the scientific department. He asked his wife to go to the school, but at least for the solemn part of the awarding of certificates. But Maria made a distant sign. "I haven't been involved in Helen's education for a long time. I don't want to be a hypocrite, participating in this celebration." The professor only shrugged his shoulders and smiled guiltily at his daughter. "I apologized for the way things turned out." However, Helen was already hardened by life, and she only grinned. She did not expect anything else. However, the behavior of her father she still assessed as a betrayal and chose a university for herself in another city. Her father rented her an apartment. Here you have to give justice. The stepmother never interfered if the father spent money on his daughter. "I know for myself in the hostel, and it is difficult to study well," said the professor. "There you stay up late, you bring friends. And if you are going to study seriously, you need a quiet and working environment." He went with his daughter, visited her new apartment, gave a generous sum of money for Helen to buy everything she needed. But when the girl became a student, her behavior changed. It's as if she got to all sorts of entertainment. Now she often lingered in nightclubs, carefree fun with new friends. They could drink so much that they could hardly tell the cab driver their home address. And boys for the evening to pick up and afford any other craziness. And Helen dressed in ways she never would have thought possible. She used to wear bright, flashy things. She used to leave her hair loose. She was naturally very good-looking, and she was never without male attention. Another thing is that now she remained as kind and trusting as she had always been. She was introduced to Leo by a classmate. Julia had a boyfriend, and he had a friend. Why not sit together with the same company? They were already settled at a table in a cafe. The friend's boyfriend was running late. But when he showed up, Julia's face stretched. She must have thought she blundered. Finished with the wrong guy. Suddenly he looked like he'd stepped out of the pages of a men's fashion magazine. No, in this case it didn't matter what he was wearing, but that hard face. The sneer. Such bright eyes and black eyebrows in the span of a young girl is covered with pictures of such a Superman. His bedroom. It was strange that Leo still didn't have a girlfriend. He willingly took on the role of Helen's beau. For the rest of the evening, he took care of her, pouring her wine, laughing at her jokes. And when the party was over, he walked her home. Perhaps it could have been limited to a few kisses goodbye. But Helen saw no reason why not. Why shouldn't they end a wonderful evening? On an equally marvelous night, she took her new pal by the hand and carried him back to her house. And indeed, the night was so intoxicating that in the morning both didn't want to part. That was where it all began. The romance spun up most impetuously, and 2 weeks did not pass. Leo confessed his love to Helen and asked her to marry him. She was amazed at such a hasty decision, especially since, having looked at her family, she did not want to get a stamp in her passport as soon as possible. Girlfriends met the news differently. someone who enthusiastically forbade and began to ask for a wedding, preferably as a witness. Someone who has already seen the handsome Leo and frankly invited. And Sophia's closest friend only shook her head. Sophia was not a prude at all. She was happy to open up at the same parties that Helen was happy to pick up guys for one night. So Helen was all the more surprised. "What do you like?" she asked. "I'm not getting married yet, but you should have seen how beautifully he proposed to me. All honorable." On her knees, with a bouquet of flowers and a stunning gilt diamond ring, Helen showed her hand with a dainty ring. "I said I would think about it." With poorly concealed pride, she said, "And at any rate, as long as I wear the ring, I will be faithful to it." And what did he interrogate Sophia about? "It seemed to me that he was very upset that I had not consented," Helen confessed at once. "I think he imagined that I would turn, throw myself on his neck, and confess my eternal love in return." Sophia shook her head again. "I haven't had any experience of my own family life, of course," she said. "But I don't often see guys of that age getting married so quickly. So far, I've only seen a few cases of young men proposing marriage so quickly. And you know who they were talking about? Alcohol. And both of them were already incorrigible. Or, as they say, incurable. And they'd already tried marriage, but their wives couldn't take it for long." "You mean he drinks?" Helen laughed. "I'm gonna disappoint you, but I'm a leader in this business. You know I sometimes can't resist an extra cocktail, and he doesn't even guzzle. He's driving. What do you know about him?" Sophia kept up. "Well, his father left the family early. His mother raised him, but she was difficult. She drove men around and paid little attention to her son. Maybe that's what we have in common. Neither he nor I had a normal family." "Maybe," Sophia agreed thoughtfully. "But if I were to advise you to look for a husband, it would be among those guys who had a normal, good family, where the father was used to taking care of the mother, whose son saw that." "And I lazily pitied with unexpected seriousness," said Helen. "He, like me, wanted warmth at home, and his mother gave all her warmth to strange men. He hoped that she would at least give birth to another child, and he would have a brother or sister to take care of. But no. He grew up a lonely orphan with a living mother. But you're not going to run off and marry him right now, are you?" "No, of course not." Helen sounded concerned. "I've already messed up my studies with these affairs. I have debts for the last session. There's no way I can retake it, and I have to do it. It would be a big blow to my father if I suddenly dropped out of the institute. He's the one who pays my rent and gives me money to live on." "Yes," Sophia agreed. "So far you've had it easy. But if you lose your allowance, you'll have to work part-time like many other students." Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worst for Helen, when she once again came to retake the course. The teacher, who already disliked her, tried to do everything to stump the girl. He asked unexpected questions, demanded knowledge of additional material. Helen had spent several sleepless nights preparing for the exam, and now she had everything mixed up in her head. She ended up getting another D. In the study section, she was told that, in general, if she did not want to be expelled, she had two options: or take a leave of absence for whatever reason or switch to a paid department. The girl was not satisfied with both options, but the second was worse than the first. Studying was expensive. She could not take this load on her father. It remained to take an academic classmate, whose mother was a gynecologist, asked her to make a fake pregnancy certificate. Helen was given a sabbatical leave. The girl decided to get a job in a cafe, save up some money. And if she couldn't recover next year, she'd pay for her own tuition. But Leo, when he found out what had happened, insisted on marriage with redoubled force. "You won't be dependent on your father," he urged. "I earn enough, if you want to. You'll study further. Do you want to?" "No. Don't you like the prospect of being your own boss?" Helen resisted for a while. She did get a job as a waitress in a small restaurant, but she didn't last long. First, she was snapped at by a customer who thought Helen was too clumsy and sloppy. Then her companions accused her of cheating on her tips. In this restaurant, it was customary to deposit tips in a common pot, and then to distribute them. And most of it went to those who had worked here for a long time. The newcomers, on the other hand, got the crumbs, This unwritten rule seemed so unfair to Helen that she actually arranged for some of the money that visitors gave her. In short, the girl was out on the street. And that's when she went to the registry office with Leo. They took the application, and the glowing groom asked her what kind of wedding she wanted. Something modest? Helen asked, "You don't have to spend a lot of money on all this tinsel. I'm fine if we get a table somewhere." "Oh, that's fine." Leo seems to be okay with that. "I wouldn't want to be the lead in a play where everyone's staring at you." Helen laughed at you. "You're the one who's handsome like a movie star." "Not me. I'll be invited. By the way, I haven't been to your house yet. You haven't met my family. My relatives live on the other side of the country and are unlikely to come to the wedding. I'd love to show you the house next weekend. Only now it seems too small. I never thought about it before. But now that I've met you, I want a big, very big family." Helen only laughed. No, she didn't mind children. But first, he'd have to get his degree. The day before the wedding, he gave her a present. They were to go on a wedding trip, but it was supposed to be special, just like he was special. He rented a cottage by a lake in one of the northern regions, but you probably can't swim there. "Yes?" Helen mumbled confusedly. She had assumed that they would go somewhere after the wedding. But she imagined that it would be the south, maybe Turkey or one of the European countries. Even the Krasnodar region. Sea, sun, fruit. A room in a nice hotel. They would get up at dawn and walk along the beach, holding hands. But Leo even grumbled. "You can't find privacy there in season with so many people. The beaches are jammed with excursion crowds, and I want you and me to be alone." And after a few days, Helen was convinced that her husband was right. Instead, he chose a wonderful retreat and a cottage in the woods, surrounded by huge picturesque fir trees. How wonderful the pine needles smelled. It took a few minutes to walk along the wooden planking to the lake and sit on the bridges and admire the view. The water in the lake was the clearest and not so cold. They enjoyed swimming several times a day. The cottage was small, but Helen fell in love with it. 2 bedrooms, the second one was obviously unnecessary. A cozy kitchen finished in wood and a living room with a window and a fireplace. The ceiling-high refrigerator was filled with groceries and newlyweds. There was no need to drive to the nearest town, although it was a quarter of an hour at most by car. Helen had never had such a good time. They would actually get up at dawn, have coffee on the terrace, and then the whole day belonged to them. One could walk along forest paths, discovering new picturesque corners. You can splash as much as you like in the clear, clean water. On rainy days, one could read by the fireplace, listening to the sound of the rain. And that night they spent under the open sky, sheltered by a single plate, with the same old starry river flowing over their heads. Helen had forgotten to bring her birth control pills. Going through the small medicine cabinet, she discovered they were gone, although she thought she had put them in with her medication. At first, she was saddened by this, but then she waved goodbye. And she felt so good next to Leo that she thought, as it will be, so it will be. She was sure her husband would solve any problem with him. She would not have to think about her daily bread, or about the fact that the child lacked something. In this corner of paradise, Helen felt as if she had rested for all the past years. She felt truly loved and desired. So she didn't want to go back to normal life. But Leo had promised her another surprise, and he was not wrong in promising that his house would make her admire him. She hadn't expected her husband to be such a wealthy man. It was a beautiful mansion on the outskirts of town. It wasn't exactly a high-profile place. It's not the waterfront, but it's near the woods. You could look at it and reminisce about your wedding trip. High, low fence, automatic opening doors. "I'll be safe for you here," Leo said. "No one's gonna steal you away from me. Who needs me?" Helen started to pay and went to look at her new possessions. The house was not that big. A kitchen on the first floor and a living room on the first floor. 3 rooms, bedroom, study. And the third one Leo said would be a nursery. Last of all, he showed her the basement. Most of it was set up as a gymnasium. There was also a small room. According to Leo, Helen's eyes shone for storage of all kinds of junk. She mentally envisioned making this the most beautiful house in the world. She didn't know exactly how much Leo earned. But she was sure that she would have enough for various transformations. And she'd be working soon, too. "Don't you have some blag to find me a place?" she asked at dinner. Helen always tried to turn dinner into a little celebration. Not only cooked something tasty, but also beautifully set. Our table. She'd set glasses, pour wine and talk. Under such a feast was usually the most pleasant. But now Leo looked up at her in surprise. "Why do you have to work?" Helen was confused. "I always thought that I should not sit on my neck." "You're not sitting on my neck." "I always thought I'd patronize and pamper my wife. She wouldn't have to work for someone else's uncle and put up with his whims." Helen was very pleased to hear this, and the conversation ended there. A week later, however, the young woman returned to him. Now Leo went to work every morning, and Helen spent the whole day alone. In addition, her husband always returned at different times. "You can't guess what time to make dinner so that everything is hot." "I'm thinking of getting a job," she said. She poured her husband coffee again and added, "Well, I'm here all day by myself. You're not going to watch TV or read all day long, are you? I should at least get my license. I could go to a friend's house or shopping. And if you were babysitting, you'd be bored too." Leo looked at her carefully. "But that's another matter." Helen even laughed. "My familiar girls say that the first time after childbirth, and so you go like a zombie with one single dream to sleep. So why should you get a job now and then go straight to maternity leave?" Leo asked. "But I still want to finish the institute first. You can't even imagine. What a disappointment it will be for Dad if I don't have a diploma." Helen protested. "Dad lives only for his science." Leo shrugged, and a few days later Helen took a test and found out she was pregnant. Leo organized a real celebration. Helen wanted to invite Sophia, her closest friend, but he objected. "This is the most important moment in our family's life. We don't need outsiders." But there were flowers and very expensive champagne and ice cream. Helen's favorite sweet, which she preferred to cakes and pastries. Leo immediately said that she would be observed and give birth in a private clinic. No flow doctor who will behave from the beginning and up to the delivery. The most attentive attitude separate room. Of course, Helen could not help but be grateful to her husband for such care. But privacy has already begun. A little burdensome for her. However, the doctor who brought her, Leo sent Helen to all sorts of examinations, and the results were not too pleased. "And you look healthier and stronger than you really are. But things aren't going so well. Something's threatening the baby. Is Helen scared?" "Not if you follow all the recommendations. The doctor said to stick to bed rest. At any moment, you could become dizzy, uncoordinated. You should be able to sit or lie down." "I see." Leo, who was present during the examination, asked his wife affectionately, "So you can't leave the house, dear? And just in case you don't run away, I'll take away your keys." He turned the matter into a joke. But soon Helen actually discovered that a set of keys was missing from her purse. "It's not funny," she said. "You're missing your husband for a long time. I might need something. It's not like I'm going to turn into a forge with no freedom. When the baby comes, everything will change." He promised her, and Helen had to accept it. Leo locked the gate securely when he left in the mornings. So Helen really felt like a prisoner trapped within four walls. "But at least I can have visitors." She couldn't stand it. Leo raised his eyebrows. "Who do you want to see?" "At least Sophia. It's been forever since we've met." He thought for a few moments. "Okay, invite her over for the weekend when I'm home too." Sunday night went wonderfully. Sophia had brought good wine and some toys for the baby to grow up with, she joked. The couple gave her a tour of the house, and then all sat together on the rug in the living room, lapping light sweet wine and talking. The terms of the news had piled up. Helen, too, wanted to talk about her life, to complain about how much she missed her. But Leo was sitting next to her. It was kind of uncomfortable in front of him. If he'd gone somewhere, well, even for a quarter of an hour. But he wouldn't leave his girlfriends. True, he behaved with extraordinary gallantry and tried to charm Sophia. The only moment they had alone together was when Sophia asked to go to the bathroom. "I'll show you the bathroom." Helen jumped up. "How do you live?" Sophia asked. As she slept, nodded her hands. Even if Leo stood under the door from behind the noise of the water, he heard nothing. Everything is normal. Well, yeah, pretty much. Helen really wanted to tell her how much she longed, but she was afraid Sophia wouldn't understand. After all, the way she was living now was dictated by Leo's care for her. I thought you were locked up like a bird in a cage. No, Sophia asked obliquely. He's a good macho guy, but if you decide to run away from him, I understand. And by the way, if you want, you can stay at my place. Sophia had a small apartment, a studio, where she had lovingly designed every corner. There was room for bookshelves, a good record player, and even a small bar. And the loggia Sophia spotted and arranged there a working office, combined with a greenhouse. But only a baby crib will not fit there. And yet Helen had tears in her eyes. Sophia, it turns out, understood her. Thank you, she whispered. That same evening, when she went to bed, Helen asked her husband, "Can Sophia come to visit us more often? I have more fun with her. I won't have to ask to go anywhere." If she was hoping to take her husband away, she was wrong. "Your girlfriend will not come to our house again," Leo said. "Why not?" Helen was stunned. "You should have thought of bringing wine to a pregnant woman." "I hardly ever drink." Helen justified herself. "You don't need a glass, but I wouldn't let you have more. If she shows up next time without me, how do I know what she's carrying? Maybe a bottle of whiskey. I assure you she wouldn't think twice. And I say what would. You're a kind soul. You don't know how jealous people can be. If something happened to your baby, your Sophia will comfort you. And in your heart you'll be glad it happened. You don't think she's jealous of you now. That you have a husband, a nice house, that you're pregnant, and that she has a job and a room the size of a dog kennel. I bet she drinks a lot and is willing to sleep with anyone she meets." Helen was hit by a wave of icy indignation. "You don't know her at all," she said coldly. "You haven't told me anything about your family. When I asked about it, you gave me complicated answers. But I can tell you about my family. I had no mother. I grew up with a stepmother. I never had a sister. Well, Sophia is the sister I've been missing my whole life. And she successfully dragged you to all sorts of companies, all sorts of bad places. What kind of hot spots? I'm imagining things. If we went to coffee shops or nightclubs, then I'm in the clear. You do realize what kind of people go there, right? Men come to eat girls like this." "I'm a girl," Helen said. "I didn't say that, but with that dog you could act like a girl. Look, I'm not asking you where exactly you work or who you're around. You know I run a security firm. And it's all men. So maybe you're hooking up with them." Romans asked Helen in anger. He slapped her on the cheek. No one had ever hit her before. And to raise a hand on a pregnant woman. Helen recoiled and cried. "There is no greater insult to a man than what you just said to me." Leo walked out, slamming the door. Helen cried for a long time, but the room was so quiet, not a single sound coming from the room, and she gradually began to calm down. The very surroundings had a calming effect on her. It was so beautiful in her room. Everything in soft pink colors. In the end, she came to realize that it was largely her own fault. Men have certain red lines they can't cross. And she had apparently violated the unspoken prohibition. Still, Helen thought that her husband would apologize to her, and she would try to forget the horrible scene. She and her husband spent the night apart. Helen fell into an unexpectedly deep sleep after many tears. She woke up several times, and each time she checked to see if Leo was there. It seemed to her that he must be there. After all, loving people always understand if they have hurt someone else and try to earn forgiveness, even if they are not guilty. But Leo did not come. In the morning, Helen heard that her husband was going to work. She couldn't believe that he was going for nothing. Besides, she wanted to eat too. So she casually walked into the kitchen where he was finishing breakfast, poured herself a cup of coffee, and made a sandwich. "What should I buy today?" Leo asked, as if nothing was wrong. "Will you write a list?" She usually gave him a shopping list with her, except for the very first few days when she was nauseous. So it lay in a thumb drive. But now Helen opened her eyes in surprise. It was as if Leo had forgotten everything that had happened yesterday. "You hit me," she said. And I was surprised at him. It just couldn't have happened. You had a bad dream. Don't you remember anything? No, I shook my head. But if I upset you, I'm sorry. So what should I buy today? Helen made a short list of groceries. When her husband left, she wanted to lounge on the couch with her phone, as usual. She was used to reading books from digital libraries lately, but she couldn't find her cell phone. In vain. She looked for it all over the room, checked the bathroom, looked in every nook and cranny in the living room and kitchen. There was no cell phone. She remembered that there was a landline in the house and decided to call her own cell phone from it. Then she would hear a familiar tune and find the missing cell phone. But it turned out that the landline phone was disconnected. That day, Helen was unusually bored. She didn't know what to do until her husband arrived. She had long since weaned herself off the television. Walking was only possible in the small garden. You can't go beyond the fence. The gate is locked. Shit, she can't even contact Sophia. If the cell phone is somehow lost, Sophia could buy a new one, and she would give her friend the money later. When Leo arrived in the evening, the first thing Helen asked him was if he knew where the phone was. Though in her heart she was sure he would answer no. All the more startled by his words. You don't want the phone. How's that? She sat like that. You'll be calling your friends, talking about your life to me. And I don't want anyone dragging my name around. Especially not dirty girls like Sophia. And you say you don't remember the scene last night. Helen summarized bitterly. I'm afraid it will be exactly the same today. I don't know what you mean, but all that cell phone service and radiation. I don't think it's good for the baby. Helen laughed, but it sounded almost hysterical. Look, this isn't the Stone Age, and everyone has a cell phone. I don't part with mine. And I know his voice was calm, like he was talking to a baby, but it's not good for you. Look at you now, your nerves are shot. And I need to keep you safe from any anxiety. Give me the phone, and I'll calm down. I brought you something else. Leo went out and came back with a small flat box. You say you mostly read books on the internet? I bought you an ebook, and at my request, they put 100 detectives and love stories in it. When you read it, everyone tells me I'll announce your library, but that's not what this is. Do you have a TV for the news? What else do you need? I need to be able to contact someone. You're out all day. What if something happens to me? Get sick? I'd have to call an ambulance to get you out of work. Now I won't leave you so long. Leo said affectionately, I'll stop by in the middle of the day to see if you're all right. And he did visit her once or twice a day. He always came at different times, and he didn't stay long, sometimes only for a few minutes, to make sure everything was all right. Helen panted, wandering around the rooms. An e-book couldn't replace the internet for her. She realized that she had complained about loneliness for nothing before. She could sit on forums, chat in chat rooms. She could contact the same Sophia through social networks. Now she was deprived of all that. The books her husband had downloaded for her were cheap reading and couldn't occupy her thoughts. Does he really care about me that much? She asked herself, but it's really choking me. Hormones were probably affecting her too, because she didn't recognize herself. Every now and then she started crying like a hurt child and felt very unhappy. A few days later, Helen told her husband, I can't go on like this. I'm leaving you. He was just finishing his lunch and gave a marvelous green pea. Leo raised his eyebrows in surprise. Where are you going to go? Shouldn't you care? She answered defiantly. I understand, he said calmly. Now he spoke with more than just that tone. You wanted to live with your Sophia until the divorce was finalized, and then have a baby, get a job, and get child support. I painted the right picture. So what? 1,000 women live like that? Helen twitchy chin. But you're not gonna live like that. First of all, you're not going anywhere because you're carrying my baby, and I'm not going to give you the opportunity to steal it from me. I'm not going to steal. Helen realized for the first time that her husband might not just let her go. Just like that. Will you be able to see him? He shook his head. I don't like it. But don't you realize what's made me unhappy? You're not yourself right now. Leo took his time and poured coffee for both of them. Then when the baby comes, you'll think you're crazy for a while. It's okay, it'll get better. You'll see that you can't stop me from leaving. You're a free man. But so am I. Are you sick now? Leo tried to stroke his wife's arm, but she pulled her back. The sick are taken care of without asking for their consent. I will leave, Helen said not so confidently. No, you won't. But if you want to, you can try. When did Leo leave? Helen walked around the castle one more time and realized that her husband was right. Maybe a man trained and physically strong would be able to get out of here. But not a pregnant woman whose eyes darken every now and then and for whom physical effort is contraindicated. The wall is high and topped with metal peaks. She has no phone now. The gate is on an automatic lock. The house is set back from the other buildings, and there's no way that if she screams, anyone will hear her. And besides, it would be a lot easier for Leo to make her look crazy. Helen remembered an acquaintance who had an elderly mother. Emily would go to work in the mornings, and the old lady would open the window and scream that she was being murdered. Called her daughter for help. Her greatest fear was that her mother would fall out. So she finally put bars on the windows. The mother was sedated, but nothing worked. Her screams echoed down the street. Another thing, the neighbors were aware of what was going on and did not rush old ladies to help. Nevertheless, Helen tried to climb up to the attic. The roof of the house was flat, and part of it was a kind of observation platform. But Leo had made provision for that. The entrance to the attic was locked. The young woman cried once again. In her heart, she hoped that she would somehow find a way to escape and would be among her own people today. But it turned out that escape would have to be postponed until later. As a last resort, she would run away from the maternity hospital. Better yet, she'll tell everyone around her. The doctor, the nurses, the women in labor. That Leo turned the house into a prison. He's kept her imprisoned her entire pregnancy, and now needed to help her sneak out of the maternity ward with the baby. Helen didn't much care where she went. She could stay at Sophia's for a while. Cramped, but not too cramped. Then maybe she could find some work so that she could afford a nanny for the baby. At the very least, she'll move in with her father. He wouldn't kick her out of the house. Thoughts of her father brought her back to the institute, which Helen had forgotten all about. Her father still thinks she's studying, doesn't he? He sends her money for the apartment, and it is saved on her card. But Leo has the card too, as well as all family documents, passports, policies. He hid them all in the home safe under the pretext that Helen's absent-mindedness is not worth losing documents at the most inopportune moment. When we get to the maternity hospital, we'll find out that you left everything at home and can't remember where your passport is. That's when Leo was telling her all this. His words had sounded like a joke, but now Helen realized that she was the door behind which she was, figuratively speaking, locked. Another shift appeared. It would be okay if she could get away. Sophia will give her money for a cab, and her father won't ask for his own daughter's papers. If Leo won't give her passport back, Helen will recover it later. She'll say she lost it. In the meantime, maybe try another way to give up food. If she goes on a hunger strike, Leo will have to do what she wants. After all, he's so looking forward to this baby. He will not allow Helen to starve. It could be bad for the baby. And on this day, she didn't make dinner. When her husband returned, Helen sat in her room on the wide windowsill and looked out of the window. It was raining. There was a fence and wet lilac bushes in front of her eyes. She knew her husband was about to make sure there was nothing to eat if he made a scandal. Well, Helen was ready for that. Instead, Leo was rattling around in the kitchen. Half an hour later, he walked in on her. "Let's go to dinner. Everything's on the table." "I'm not hungry," Helen said without turning from the window. "You don't feel well." He became alarmed. "Can you take it that way? There's hot soup and rolls waiting for you. Coffee, of course." Helen was very hungry, but she was sure she could stand it, and only shook her head negatively, saying, "I won't go." "If you don't break the regimen," Leo kept talking to her like a child, "we'll go out this weekend. We'll walk in the park, have ice cream. You've really been away from home, haven't you?" Helen couldn't believe her ears. Leo couldn't realize that when she was outside the gate, she would leave him immediately. She'd jump out of the car. For that matter. Yeah, he nodded. "I'm not kidding." "Well said, Helen. I'll be right down." She cleaned herself up a bit, washed her face, and changed her pajamas for a robe. She didn't like to walk around, unraveled. But until this minute, her mood had been so bad that she didn't feel like doing anything. Now it was different. So pull yourself together, her husband said to her at dinner. If you don't feel well, of course we won't go anywhere. But if everything will be normal, then I intend to treat you a little. Shall we go to the store and get you something? You'll soon be able to wear the clothes you're used to. It was Monday, and all week Helen had behaved exemplarily. Now she had no doubt that she would be free before the deadline. She did the usual household chores, and at the same time her head was full of thoughts. If Sophia had guessed and come to her house when her husband was away, they could have talked over the fence. Maybe somehow a friend could give her the phone. But in any case, Sophia wouldn't refuse to take her in. Helen had no doubt about that. On Saturday morning, Helen looked at her husband, as if asking what their plans were for the day. Unfortunately, I'm being called into work today, Leo said. Getting my second cup of coffee. Do you remember what you promised me? The young woman couldn't stand it. What did he pretend not to remember? But then he laughed. Of course, I know how much you're looking forward to it. Let's go tomorrow right from the morning. It was rainy on Sunday, but Leo was not going to cancel the trip. First, he brought Helen to the country square. The rain had already stopped freezing, but there was not a single person in the alleys. The young woman was very disappointed at the circumstance. If she just tried to run away from Leo here, he would catch up with her in a few seconds, and there was no one to turn to for help. At this time, the husband received a phone call. There is a slight change of plans, he told Helen. I have to be in the office now, but it dragged on interminably. You can go shopping by yourself. I'll give you the card, if you don't mind. Helen could only nod. I'll give you 2 hours. I'll call a cab, then I'll wait for you at home. Leo sat his wife down himself, pulled up his car, and gave the address Center City, the very street that was considered the center of big and small stores. Helen watched in the small mirror as her husband's figure moved away. Change of plans, she told the cab driver. As soon as the car rounded the corner, I'll stop by a friend's house first. If only she had ended up at Sophia's, she would have nothing more to fear. Helen didn't regret not bringing her things with her. Didn't care. She would get a job and be able to provide herself and the baby with the essentials. The main thing was to get out of this captivity. The cab driver shrugged his shoulders, saying he didn't care where he was taking her. And after a quarter of an hour, he stopped the car near the house where Sophia lived. Helen awkwardly got out of the cab. She had lost the gracefulness of her movements since the onset of her pregnancy. She still had to climb to the 3rd floor, and her heart was racing like a hare's. There was a slight odor of Wendy's in the stairwell, and Helen was overcome with nostalgia. It had always smelled like this in here. Sophia's neighbor old lady, Wendy, had a great deal of respect for it and put it generously in all the closets and commands. Helen pressed the bell button, imagining that in a few seconds her friend would open the door for her, and they would throw themselves around each other's necks. But no one rushed to open it. In vain, Helen called again and again with a falling heart. The young woman realized that her friend was not at home. She must have gone to the store somewhere. But she would wait for Sophia. There was no other way out. Helen lost the bag and sank down on the steps. When she heard the front door open, she was alarmed. It could have been Sophia. A few moments later, she couldn't believe her eyes. Leah was coming up the stairs. How did you find me? She asked, barely audibly. Honey, it was a test, and you didn't pass it. I had no doubt you would escape, though. And of course, I had no trouble guessing where. There's nowhere else to go. If you were smart, you'd get in a cab and go to your father's. But you're a poor, naive fool. Don't call Sophia. She's on vacation in the South, and I'm sure she's perfectly happy and doesn't think about you. And you knew she was away. Helen asked with just her lips. Of course I knew. Otherwise, I wouldn't have offered you that walk. What kind of a bitch are you? Now let's go home, calmly, Leo continued. Not long before, Helen was contemplating when she would go into labor, whether it would be possible to keep from screaming, to shout in front of everyone. It seemed very embarrassing to her, but now she was exactly screaming help. Leo squeezed her hand tightly. You want me to call the psychiatric team? I have a friend who works there. He's aware of the problem and will come faster than the police. If you expect her to be called by the neighbors, a psychiatrist will tell the cops you have a diagnosis, and a caring husband will drive you. So I suggest you don't embarrass yourself and make yourself look crazy in front of a lot of other people." With her head down, Helen followed her husband. The tide of emotions was too strong. She felt sick, barely able to stand on her feet. Leo's car was parked in the driveway. He loaded his wife into the back seat like a thing in a mirror. Helen saw his grin. She closed her eyes and didn't open them the whole way. She really felt no longer a human being as a person as before, but an object, belonging to a master. Helen had become depressed. Not only did she not do household chores, but she would not leave her room, lying all day long, turning her back to the wall and keeping silent when she had to get up to go to the restroom. She felt herself weakening quickly, and it was a pleasant sensation. Helen wanted to sink into oblivion as soon as possible and leave this world that way. And the last thing she wanted was for Leo to disturb her and talk to her. The day came when he came and put a chair next to her bed and sat down. "It won't go on like this," he said. "If you don't eat, you won't last long." Helen twitched and, without turning around, made it clear that she didn't care. "Now you're definitely mentally ill," Leo continued. "And if you don't do something about it, you're not going to get better." "Let me go," Helen said. "Come with me." She got out of bed, listless, like a marionette. She no longer believed her husband. Leo held her hand tightly as they went down the stairs and then down another one to the basement. Helen wondered if she had the strength to make it upstairs. After all, and this was indifferent to her, what did it matter where she lay? Might as well be on the floor in the hall. In the basement, Leo opened the very door that was usually closed, for which his old things were kept, as he had said. Now Helen saw that the room was completely empty. A cage. Now her husband held Helen by both hands and spoke to her like a child. "If you behave as you do now, I won't be able to leave you alone. You understand? In your condition, you could hurt yourself. There's plenty of opportunity for that up there in the house. And I can't let anything happen to you and the baby. You keep going. You'll be seen by a psychiatrist friend of mine, prescribed pills, and you'll live here with all the furniture. Mattress, night potty is fine. You had this torture chamber specially set up?" she asked. "No," I shrugged. "It's not uncommon for mansions to have a secret room like this to hide in. If there's a break-in, a robbery, or some other emergency. This time it's my emergency. You're the one who wants to be medicated, so you'll lie there like a vegetable. Why do you need all this?" Helen didn't realize she was going to ask that question herself. Neither did Leo expect it. He was silent for a few moments. "Because you're mine," he finally said. "When you and I got married, you're the only one I belong to. I've never thought of leaving you or changing you, but you're always tearing yourself apart. But I won't let you go. You promised, Leo. But 1 million people get divorced." Helen said tiredly, "What makes you think our marriage is special? I think you're the one who's mentally ill, not me." "Be that as it may," he replied, holding back his anger. "Do you have to answer that question? Do you want to spend the time left before the birth in a human way? Or do you want to be locked up in here? Not humanly. It will be either way." Helen sighed. "You know, I don't care. It's up to you." "Okay," he said. "We'll give you another chance. Well, have something to eat tonight. Let's go upstairs." And Leo helped his wife up the steps, overcome that she couldn't do it alone. Helen knew she had to wait for the birth, but she could not have imagined the shock that awaited her. The young woman had packed a bag in advance with things she might need at the hospital. If Leo wished to check on her, well, there were no secrets. Nightgowns, hygiene items, a few books. And yet, as Helen looked at that bag, it represented to her the hope that she would be able to get out of here soon. But when it was time to go to the hospital, Leo said, "Will you give birth at home, dear?" Helen looked up, and there was pain in her eyes, as if he had hit her again. "Yes, yes," her husband went on. "The doctor is on his way. What is it that you don't like? In the old days, only the poor gave birth in maternity hospitals, and the rich had midwives. It was the order of the day, so I've organized this luxury for you. What kind of luxury is that? Helen bit her lip in pain. What about sterility? What if something goes wrong and you need an operation? There's no facilities at home. If there are problems, then we'll deal with them, Leo said nonchalantly. You're young, healthy. Everything should go as it should. To be honest, Helen soon didn't care who her doctor was, whether sterility would be assured for the next few hours. She felt like she was dying. The pain was so intense that the paramedics who arrived had to give her anesthesia. Maybe they did it out of mercy? Or maybe Leo had insisted, not wanting his wife's screams to be heard on the street. Even though their house was on the edge of the woods, it was still the edge of the street. When Helen came to, she didn't immediately realize where she was. Nothing hurt. It was blissfully light. For a while, she thought she had returned to her childhood and was lying on her bed in her parents' house. Then her vision began to focus and she saw a dark red that it took another effort to remember everything. Someone entered the room. Helen turned her head and saw Leo's face. His was as fearless and calm as ever, unbelievable. Who was born? Barely audible, she asked. We have a baby girl. Show her to me, Helen asked, and mentally added not at us, but at me. Then said Leo, I want you to show her to me. Helen's old stubbornness was definitely back. After all, it was me who gave birth to her. Now you get some sleep, and then I'll show her to you, Leo promised. Helen knew it was useless to ask, and she was in no condition to get up and leave to look for her daughter right now. She was very weak. As soon as she closed her eyes, she fell, either into sleep or unconsciousness. Leo did not deceive her when Helen woke up feeling better. Leo had brought her baby. Helen was afraid to hold her daughter in her arms, such a small, tiny newborn head. It required careful support. Is she all right? Helen asked, not noticing she was crying. She put her daughter to her breast. What did the doctors say? The girl is healthy. Let there be faith, Helen decided, gazing into the baby's face. She didn't need hope. It was something shaky and uncertain, driving happiness crazy. She needed a firm belief that they would both get out of this nightmare quest. Leo agreed nicely. There was no crib in the room, and as the newborn napped, Helen began to look around helplessly, where to put her. Let me carry the baby to her room. Leo held out his arms. I want her to live with me. Helen slowly. Okay, tomorrow we'll move the crib in here and move everything around. But you need to sleep well tonight so you won't be woken up by baby cries. You need to rest. Don't you realize I can hear her from any room? But still Helen gave her husband the baby. And he was right. Her strength was so exhausted that she slept soundly and dreamlessly that night. When she woke up in the morning, she realized she could try to get up. Leo brought her breakfast. Coffee, toast, jam, eggs. Bring it, Emily, demanded Helen. And noticing the strange expression on his face, she threatened him, or I'll definitely go on a hunger strike. Emily no longer lives in this house, he said. What? Helen's heart literally stopped. Don't be so scared. She's still doing fine. Only she will live somewhere else and other people will take care of her. And if you want to see her someday, you don't do anything stupid. That's the surest way to keep you in line, he added with a chuckle. Helen looked at him with horror. Are you a human being? She asked, shocked. And who is? Was there a grin on his face? You're just a crazy sadist. I understand that you are excited. There have been so many changes in your life yet, but I still control my behavior and my words. Unless you want to spend the rest of your life in an insane asylum. That's where you won't be seen, Emily. Her husband bowed slightly and left. From that day on, personal hell began for Helen. After a tantrum so violent she could have died or gone mad. There was a breakdown in her character. It was like she lost her will. She became submissive like a dog that wants to earn its master's approval. She now lived day by day, fulfilling all his wishes, so that on the first of every month he threw on her lap another picture of Emily. Here is the baby learning to lift her head, to roll over, to sit up. Here she was taking her first timid steps, stepping along the couch. Helen tried to understand where her daughter was, based on the surroundings. But only a white wall was in the photographer's field of vision, and this very worn cherry-colored couch. And of course, the baby. Helen had no doubt that it was her daughter, even though she had only seen the little girl once. It was undoubtedly her. Helen recognized Emily's face as her own. Same nose shape, slit, and eye color. Except that the girl's hair was blonde, like Leo's. From the outside, it might have seemed that Helen's situation was now better. She began to leave the house invariably in the company of her husband. But still now the two of them were seen in cafes, stores, 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 and parks. But Helen saw this freedom as a humiliation. If before she had nurtured in herself hatred for her husband and considered him crazy, now she was forced to pretend to be a happy wife. Leo had warned her if she tried the antics he said she would never see the baby again. And Helen knew her husband was capable of carrying out his threat, even if she managed to get to the police. And Leo would be apprehended. He just wouldn't reveal the secret where the girl was. How long would this torture last? Helen asked herself longingly, would it ever end? Would her husband abuse her? A year, 2, 3, or a lifetime? Her psyche was teetering on the brink. Helen was afraid that such a life would make her lose her mind. Now she was bound to Leo much more firmly than before by the word, and hoped to see her daughter someday. She and Leo got into the habit of stopping by the supermarket on Saturday nights and buying groceries for the week. One time, Helen was selecting an item in the dairy department, and Leo walked a little farther to pull a bottle of wine off the shelves. The unfamiliar young man quickly passed the young woman, but also dropped a carton of milk into her cart. Helen opened her mouth in surprise at first, then saw Sophia in the back of the store in the distance, making a hand sign to her. Everything was going as it should. Helen nodded involuntarily. They were not allowed to approach each other. Leo would stop it immediately, and there was no telling what Helen's punishment would be. Maybe he would lock her in the basement or beat her up again. He often raised his hand to her. Helen was used to enduring the pain. She didn't scream or cry now. She only flinched like a dog being kicked by a cruel master. When she and Leo arrived home, the first thing Helen did was look at the milk carton, and her pencil had written, "Your father is dying. No hope calling to say goodbye." And then all the skills Helen had recently acquired went out the window. She rushed to her husband. "I have to go home," she begged. He raised his eyebrows. "Why? Is father dying? I haven't seen him in years. I can never forgive myself if I don't say goodbye to him. You're not the ultimate monster. Let me go for a few days and I'll be back. I swear to you, or let's go together." He grabbed her chin. "How do you know about your father? Tell me," she blurted it out. It was the first thing that popped into her head. "I met a friend at the store." She said, "Don't lie." He didn't believe it for a second. "First of all, you weren't talking to anyone there. Secondly, if someone had told you about your father, you'd have told me right away. And you only found out about it now. Someone handed you the phone, wrote you a note. Tell me." Helen didn't see any other choice but to lay it on the line, did she? Maybe then he'd take pity and let her go to her father. She showed him the ill-fated box. "I see," he squinted. "You're not going anywhere. Father can die just fine without you. Leo, for God's sake." Helen knelt in front of her husband. "You realize you'll do a terrible thing if you don't let me go. Fate can forgive a lot of things, but it punishes for such things. The boomerang will come and it'll be interesting to watch." His tone hasn't even changed. It was just as cold and mocking. "And for being so eager to deceive me. Next month there will be no pictures of you with." Helen had a terrible tantrum in her memory. She sobbed for hours locked in her room. And when she did want to come out, she realized that Leo's intention was not to let her out anytime soon. She spent about a week alone. It was good that the bedroom was connected to the bathroom. At least Helen was not thirsty. Her husband didn't bring her any food. It was a real prison. There were bars on the windows to keep out burglars. The view was of a high fence with a forest beyond. Helen didn't know when she would be released, but when Leo got the call to report that her father had died, Her husband purposely came to the door so she could hear his voice. Leo expressed his condolences and said that unfortunately he and Helen could not make it to the funeral. Very busy with work. Well, as soon as they have a moment to spare, they'll come and look at it. It seemed like a week. Helen felt that her mind was tormented, and she could not tell exactly how many days had passed when Leo opened the door, could go downstairs and eat something. After that, Helen finally broke down. She became apolitical and indifferent to everything. She didn't care whether she stayed at home or followed her husband, and wherever he led her, keeping her head down. She did her homework, but she did it thorough as an automaton. When the housework was finished, she would sit or lie motionless, looking at one point. You couldn't tell whether she was immersed in her thoughts or in prostration. When Leo spoke to her, she answered him, but she answered the question. It was impossible to get a word out of her now. The question remained, why would he want such a broken doll? But it was as if he was satisfied that he had brought her to such a state that she walked like a mannequin without feelings, thoughts, and desires. That he had complete power over her. Something human appeared in Helen's gaze only when her husband placed another photograph of his daughter in front of her. She would stare at her for a long time, and the expression in her eyes would become sad, as if she were mentally talking to Emily. Then she put the pictures in the album and put it in someone's drawer. She knew that if she kept pulling out and looking at the pictures, Leo would throw the album away. Just like he destroyed everything she cared about, so she would pick up the album once a month just to put another picture in it. And so the years went by. One day, in a conversation between the couple, the number 18 came up. When Emily turns 18, I'll tell you. And then she'll decide for herself if she wants to see you. And if she does, I won't object. Helen decided to think of this day as the tipping point of her imprisonment, after which she would either have her freedom and her daughter, or she would be gone. Now she knew that it was possible not to make any effort for this not to take any sin on her soul. She would leave simply out of longing and despair. In the last month before that date, she knitted a beautiful blue shawl. It had once been her favorite color, and she hoped her daughter would like it. On the cherished day, she gave Leo the shawl package, asking him to give it to Emily for me. He grinned, but took the package. That day, he didn't come home for a long time. Helen had no doubt that he had gone to Faith. After all, she is his daughter after all, and celebrating her coming of age. When she heard the house gate open in the evening, she ran downstairs. Well, she asked. He could have taunted her by demanding, for example, that she serve him dinner first. But Leo would not do that. He handed her the package. Emily doesn't want to know you. Why not? Helen whispered with just her lips. Did you tell her what you did to me? And I told her you left her. And now you're sorry and you want to make amends. I never said a word to her about you before. Helen herself did not expect what would happen. Then she threw herself at her husband, forgetting everything. She beat him with her fists ineptly and desperately, and screamed like a man who had been hurt intolerably and painfully. Leo was so unaware of this that after only a few seconds he came to his senses, and twisted his wife, and dragged her down to the basement. Helen was lying on the floor. It was very difficult for her to move. She didn't even want to raise her head, not even to turn it. The only thing the woman wanted was for everything to end here and now. She knew that Leo had locked the door from the outside. Or rather, there was an English lock. Her husband pushed her inside and slammed the door shut. Sooner or later he would open it or he wouldn't. It was all the same. When Helen tried to pull herself up, her head fell helplessly to the floor and her broken nose bled again. But Leo had never beaten her to the point of mutilating her. One has to think now, too. Nothing was fixable. It hadn't happened. Just a cruel lesson. After a while, she'd be able to walk again like she used to. But things happened differently than Helen had envisioned. When the door swung open and Leo saw his wife, he even apparently thought he had overdone it. He walked over to her and bent over. Later, Helen felt as if it was not she who had acted, but some force. Instead, she tore at her husband's leg, in a sudden, sharp movement. And when he lost his balance for a few moments, she jumped up and dashed for the door. Only when the lock clicked behind her back, her tormentor still inside, Did she catch her breath? Helen heard her husband banging on the door and shouting something. But she also knew that the door was tight and secure. Not something even a man could just kick down. Nevertheless, she couldn't allow herself to gather herself quietly. Acting quickly, she frantically changed into jeans and a thin sweater. She threw on a jacket, shoved a few changes of underwear and the essentials into her bag. She knew where the money and her husband's card were. She didn't need to cover her tracks. On the contrary, she wanted Leo to be punished. The money, the files. Everything seemed to be in place. An ordered cab pulled up. Helen gave her friend's address. If she wasn't at home, she should go to the hospital. We weren't home. She aghast when she saw Helen with her bat on the doorstep. The friends hugged and cried, and could not unclasp the embrace. Then Sophia oiled the abrasions. Helen applied ice to the biggest bruise. She made a sandwich and a cup of strong coffee. She wanted to pour brandy, but Helen stopped her. No, don't. First, you have to go to the hospital to get the bruises removed, and then to the police. That's what the friends did. Sophia didn't leave Helen alone. She held her hand. Helen felt like Leo was about to appear behind her, calling out to her. Right on top of him, she heard his voice and picked herself up time after time. Again, there was no way for him to get out of the secret room by himself. Helen had finished telling her story to Alex, and now sat looking at the sea. What happened next? He asked, silently. Next, the police came to Leo's house. He was released from his confinement and immediately detained. There was a trial. He got less time than I expected, only 2 years. That is, he was given more, but released after 2 years. When I found out about it, I immediately left town to come here. I'll have to go back soon. How have you been living all this time? Turns out my father left me a nice inheritance. And I also found out that Leo had deposited a large sum of money into my account. Some money was no problem. That's good, because I couldn't work for a while. I was in treatment. I was very close to losing my mind. Maybe that's why they gave Leo a little bit of a pass. They thought I was crazy and that I was talking about him a lot. The beatings really couldn't be hidden. And your daughter? My ex-husband never said where she was. Not with the police, not in court. Helen shook her head, so I don't know anything. Wasn't he charged with kidnapping? He made it look like there was no baby, Helen said. There wasn't. And it's all in my sick imagination. It's a miracle that thanks to the testimony of Sophia and other people I know, it was possible to prove that he deprived me of my freedom. Why was he released so early? Alex was trying to figure it out. It doesn't make sense. I bought an apartment, said Helen. I had to have somewhere to live. But now I don't know how I'm going to get back. He'll be walking the streets of the same city. He won't leave me alone. I think he's got some kind of obsession with me. Don't you want to move? Asked Alex, to another city. Start from scratch again. A naked man on bare ground. I don't have the strength for that. My father died with my stepmother and my siblings. I don't keep in touch. I only have a few girlfriends, and now I will be forced to leave them. But when I found out he was released, I became panicky, afraid to come home, to go into an empty apartment. I feel like they're waiting for me there, waiting for the door to open, for him to come out. When do you have to go back? Asked Alex. In 3 days, answered Helen. Alex's decision to move in with Helen was met by the young man's parents in a flurry. I didn't think I would live to see this, said the mother, making me remember scenes from novels. You realize that after this, no one will respect you. Getting involved with a woman 20 years older than you. Mom, how many times have I told you I'm not having an affair with Helen? Alex wasn't so hot-headed anymore. He said those words in a tired tone. She just needs help right now. Who are you trying to fool? She's a rich woman. She can hire any help she wants, not ask a student who has no extra time. We have to learn. Even if we believed you, no one will. You be labeled as someone who can be bought. And no decent girl. Maybe it's my problem finding girls. Alex was starting to get hot. You've already found one, my mother parried. That lady should retire soon. I understand her desire to find a young boy. Alex was packing his things, trying to control himself. Stop it. Father turned to his mother. you are going to agree that Alex will not come to us. Do you understand him? Yes, man to man, mother couldn't calm down. This Helen is my age. Let me get another student instead of you. What would you say then? The father switched to his son. If you don't want to live with us, maybe just rent an apartment. We'll help you pay for it. A lot of guys your age are living with girls. Why do you have such a strange choice? Are you going to drop out? Alex was already standing in the doorway. I'll drop out if everyone needs me while I'm in. He found it easier to breathe outside. Helen lived in a new house in the heart of the city. It overlooked a square. You could admire the fountains. Sitting on the loggia with a cup of coffee. Alex, the university was a short walk from here. Walking distance. He could be grateful to Helen for a separate room with its own balcony and all the furnishings of his dwelling. Not at all comparable to his parents' modest apartment. But he could see that she needed him more than she was letting on about it. Helen stayed out of his life completely, but she cared. Alex took a sabbatical and got a job. In the morning, when he was about to leave, she would make him coffee and make him something to eat, even though he asked her not to worry and not to get up so early. She would sit against him in the kitchen, watching him eat and smiling slightly. If he didn't speak himself, she was silent with her. But it was surprisingly easy to keep silent with Helen, as if we were on the same wavelength. He came rather late. When the fall came, it was already beginning to get dark. And again, they would sit together at the table. And there was Helen's incomparable coffee in small cups. And Alex more words from the left in the evening, often humorously told about how his day went. There was nothing to tell about Helen, except about books read and movies watched. But Alex noticed that she became calmer around him. Her face rounded a little. She lost her painful thinness. Her hair began to grow. Helen went to the hairdresser, made a hairstyle that suited her more than before. She even found a hobby. She started growing flowers. By the time she became a winter girl, the apartment was like a winter garden. I guess it was the earth that had drawn her to the land as she got older. Helen shrugged his shoulders. Returning, Alex often saw such a picture. Helen sits in an armchair, as if in a green thunderstorm of branches beating all over. Softly speaking sconces, and the woman is reading a book. Alex involuntarily noted that the woman remained beautiful, despite all that she had been through. If I ever get married, I would like such a mother-in-law, he thought, feeling that Helen gradually becomes for him a native person. But sometimes, when he woke up in the middle of the night, he saw a light in the kitchen. And that means that Helen again had a terrible dream, in which the door quietly opens and her ex-husband enters. And now until morning, she will sit, drink coffee, and listen. Would there be footsteps on the stairs? She realized that these were far-fetched fears, but she couldn't help it. From Leo's house, Helen had taken nothing with her except her personal belongings, a photo album, and a blue shawl she had knitted for her daughter. The shawl now hung in her room. Alex did not hide from her that he was trying to find her husband and daughter. But he didn't tell her the details. And when the young man disappeared for days at a time, Helen knew it had something to do with the search, but she never questioned it. It was too painful and intolerable for her to hope and then be disappointed. And so the year passed. Helen wanted to talk to Alex about his plans for the summer. She herself wanted to go somewhere to the north, maybe to Karelia. She couldn't stand the heat, and she thought if the young man wanted to, he could accompany her. If he has a girlfriend, let him take her with him. She's paying for the young people's room. Alexa's presence gave her a semblance of family, but she didn't have time to talk about it. The day came when Alex knocked on her room. I need to talk to you. Helen looked up with frightened eyes. Did you find out something bad? Leo found me. We have to leave. Will you let me sit down? Settled across from Helen in the chair. Alex began to speak. I found out why your ex-husband was released. Of course, not only in connection with it, but this circumstance also played a big role. Leo went blind. As Helen asked in a whisper. There, when he was serving time, there was a fight in the zone. He got beat up pretty bad. Concussion and blindness. He was in the hospital for a long time, and he'll never see again. The doctors are sure he won't, but I wondered what he was. Why did he treat you like that? Because by the time you were married, he was already a wealthy, well-to-do man. And Emily, did you find out anything about Emily? Helen interrupted. Wait a minute. I was sure this behavior was more typical of someone from a marginalized background. But when I delved into all of this, he really had a rough childhood. After his father left, the family lived in blatant poverty. An old house, and there wasn't even heating with a stove and wood. The mother, whom Leo loved very much, began to drink first and then reached for other men. She would leave the house and spend the night somewhere. And the boy was left alone in the fuel rooms, sleeping in his jacket when she returned drunk, and often with some lonely woman bragging to her son about a new ring and a new dress. Leo asked Mom, "Why did you leave me for someone else?" "You have your whole life ahead of you," she said. "Mine is passing. And you can't give me anything right now, so don't judge me for taking from others." Maybe that's what gave him the incentive to get ahead at all costs and become a wealthy man. It was an attempt to prove something to his mother, but it failed. When Leo started earning well, his mother was already dead. A life of excess is no good. And when he met you, all his childhood complexes were realized. His mother didn't belong to him. She was always slipping away from him, swapping him for someone else. So he decided to make you all his, at any cost. At first, he thought you'd be his child. But then he realized you could leave with a baby in your arms. That's when he separated you and your daughter. He knew there was no better blackmail than a daughter. He may or may not give her back to you. And as long as he has the daughter, you'll be at his mercy. Then why did he take my hope away? He said Emily didn't want to hear from me. Alex shrugged. Maybe he was tired of playing this game for so many years. Maybe he just snapped. But he wasn't going to let you go for sure. In your face, he was definitely avenging his mother for his childhood. Where he hid his faith. That's what tormented Helen. Most of all, she's alive. He gave her to strangers to be adopted. Do you know anything about that? I know. Alex was silent for a few moments, and the woman held her breath. You have no idea who raised her. Who did? Your stepmother. He brought her the little girl and assured her that you had given her up. He's too busy with work to raise a girl. Maria really did love your father. Her own sons were grown, and she realized she couldn't give the professor's own granddaughter to an orphanage. So she raised Emily. Leo visited the girl, took pictures. Helen held her hand to her throat. She really hates me and doesn't want to know. She's at Maria's now. Come with me. Alex suggested it. I have something to show you. And I also want you to know this. I met with Vera and talked to her. Helen had long ago given the young man the keys to her car, and now the car was waiting for them at the entrance. From excitement, the woman did not realize where they were going. The city ended, the villages went on. Then the road turned into the forest. Finally, Alex stopped the car and shocked. Helen recognized the place where she and her husband had once spent their honeymoon. The cottage by the lake. It had recently rained and the air was filled with the smell of pine needles, earth, and leaves. There was a small pier next to the cottages. It was empty now. It seemed that there was not a single living soul here, but it only seemed so. Helen did not immediately see on the landing in front of the cottages in a chair sat a man from the worst with gray hair and dark glasses. Helen would not have recognized Leo, but reason told her that it was him. And standing next to him, leaning toward him, was a girl. She was saying something to the old man, stroking his arm. Then the girl threw her head down. She was as fair-haired as her mother. And with her noble features, she resembled her grandfather. For a minute, she and Helen looked back at each other. Helen wanted to walk toward Faith, but realized she couldn't move. Her legs were failing. Alex, apparently sensing her condition, took her firmly under the elbow. You are not angry that I decided to treat a little? He asked quietly. Helen did not immediately realize what he was talking about. Emily said something to her father and slowly walked towards them. The closer the girl came, the more Helen's doubts grew. No tests were needed here, no questions asked. This was her baby girl, the one she had given birth to and held in her arms only once in her life. About 10 paces away, Emily stopped. And only now Helen noticed that on the girl's shoulders lay a blue fishnet bundle. The handkerchief was the same one that had hung in Helen's room a while ago, and looking at which she believed that she would give it to her daughter someday.